If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 76, Chapter 73. Days passed and so far nothing had changed. His night hunts became more prominent just in case Jackson tried killing someone. Unfortunately for him, Jackson did kill another person on the night he decided to stay inside. Whoever it was that was controlling Jackson tried his best to limit his interactions with Tristan, so apart from the first they interacted with each other, they had never taken control of Jackson's body in front of Tristan. Maybe for fear that he'd kill their precious servant should it prove too annoying, or just out of spite. As far as anyone else was concerned, Tristan was just another bloodthirsty creature. Right now, however, said boy couldn't be less bothered by what was happening around him or the talks had behind his back, as he was currently focusing on his bloody exercise. Damn it! Why can't I just have some sort of beginner's guide to using new abilities, he complained, but his audience, Malia and Lori, only let out derisive snorts at Tristan's self-proclaimed misfortune. In front of Tristan was a tree so big that he couldn't even wrap his hands completely around it. One noticeable thing about the tree were the numerous claw marks that decorated it. Some faint, some an inch deep. The other noticeable thing about the tree was that all around the claw marks were splatters of blood that made it look as if the tree was the one being bled. Ever since the day he became knowledgeable of this ability of his, he made sure to practice it every day, and the progress in it was very apparent that when compared to the viscous blood that he used to cover his fingers for the first time, now his fingers were covered in blood that looked like red crystals. The only problem was that it still wasn't strong enough to the level Tristan wanted it to be. With his claws still out, he balled his hands into a fist and opened them again, only for them to be coated in a bloody red crystal from half the finger up. Rather than always slashing himself and wasting his blood, Tristan settled for puncturing his palms by balling his fists and then draw out the blood from that small puncture and coat his fingers with it. I still don't get what you're actually complaining about, Lori said as she swung her legs from the tree stump she was sitting on. Is it because you think your powers are still coming up slowly, or because Jackson didn't give you a good enough reason to kill him? Or maybe it's related to Allison, she said, listing off a few reasons she knew Tristan had at least a modicum of interest in. Tristan, who was about to break another set of his blood-coated claws, paused mid-motion and mulled over her words before slashing down at the bark of the tree with a higher level of irritation. Yes, and yes to the first two and no to the third. Not even batting an eye to another durability failure, he coiled his fist and started driving punch after punch into the tree with heavy thuds. His naked upper torso glistened with sweat as his hands started blurring against the tree while producing deep thuds in rapid succession. The pain, the adrenaline, and the burning sensation of an intense workout session all flowed through him, making him lose himself in the feeling as he felt even his frustrations flowing out of him with every punch. By now his knuckles were bloodied, but no one said anything or even showed concern for it, already used to a sight like this from Tristan over the years. With his eyes closed, Tristan felt that he could feel the blood more clearly now than he could before, almost like that night, and so he wiped the blood that covered his entire fist to wrap around his fist, and when they did, without even knowing if they were solidified enough, Tristan slashed down his claws, but instead of his claws scratching against the bark of the tree, something else happened. Before Tristan's hands came down fully, the blood casing around his fingers all shot out in the same projected direction and created 5 long slash marks on the tree. Tristan opened his eyes after feeling a sense of relief wash over him and saw the long slash mark that was different from the rest. Looks like something new, or rather a new application of what I could already do. Yo Trist, was that normal? Malia asked, having caught sight of what had happened with the last slash. Tristan shrugged as he cracked his already healed up fingers. First time it happened. But I guess a lot of firsts have been happening lately, so maybe this is nothing new. I can't decide whether you were trying out a joke with that or you were being sarcastic. Lori cringed as she pictured a scene of a socially awkward vampire Tristan stuck in a conversation between high school students. Ignoring Lori's words, Tristan grabbed his shirt and started walking towards their house. Got somewhere else to be? Male asked in confusion, seeing as how Tristan finished up his training earlier than usual. We got a visitor, Tristan said. Though they were a good distance away from their house, not too far and not too near, Tristan's sensitivity towards blood was on another level if he's actively trying. Hearing Tristan, the two girls pushed themselves off their seats and jogged to catch up to Tristan. Who? Derek. And 2 other wolves, neither McCall nor Jackson. Just like Tristan had said, upon getting to their house they saw Derek along with 2 other teens, both of which Tristan and Malia recognized. You must have smoked a fake courage pack to come to my house early in the morning along with your cubs, Derek. Tristan said in a dry tone, letting Derek know just how much he didn't appreciate this impromptu visit. Instead of being put off by Tristan's words, Derek laughed despite knowing fully well that Tristan meant his words. He looked at the new girl with them since this was his first time seeing her with them. Catching Derek's eyes on her, Lori calmly introduced herself in the simplest way she could. "I'm Tristan's and Malia's sister." He immediately understood who she was and nodded at her before turning back to the person he came to meet. "These are my two betas. You already know Isaac," he said pointing at the transformed teenage boy behind him, "and this is Erica." Said girl confidently flashed Tristan a teasing smile which earned her a side eye from Malia and a stink glare from Lori. "And the reason you brought your pack to my house, disrupting my morning workout, is?" Tristan asked again, staring pointedly at the alpha in front of him. "The Kanima, or whatever you called it, attacked us yesterday, or rather it attacked me and the both of them got caught up in it," he said. "Well, that isn't comforting to hear. Since you're here it means it royally kicked your ass, right?" Tristan asked while showing the smallest hint of a smile, something neither Isaac nor Erica has seen since he started school. Derek didn't answer Tristan's question since it wasn't even a fight after he fell for the poisoned claws of the Kanima. "I wanted to ask you, since you obviously know more about the Kanima, if Jackson is to die, what will happen to the master?" "Nothing," Tristan shared. "It's vice versa. If the master dies, the Kanima will seek out a new one. Someone seeking revenge," he muttered. "Interestingly, there are rules in their master-servant relationship that one is not supposed to cross, more specifically the master." Tristan then told them about what he heard about the Kanima from Satomi. Basically, the master is not allowed to carry out his own vengeance when contracted to the Kanima. Meaning he's not allowed to kill anybody himself but with the help of the Kanima. Doing so is seen as trying to usurp the position of the Kanima, and the curse of the Kanima will fall upon him, slowly turning him into a Kanima himself. "I don't know about an antidote to Jackson's paralytic toxins, so there's very little we can't about it, but I'll advise you to wait until you find the Kanima's master before you proceed to killing them. Not to mention that killing the master is far more profitable, since if you are lucky enough, you might be able to form a bond with the masterless Kanima." Tristan gave them a basic rundown of what he knew of the Kanima and what he heard from Satomi. "But there's no way we can know who the master is, more or less draw him out," Derek complained. What about the people he's killed?" Isaac timidly voiced his opinion. That's a good idea, but who wants to do a little Sherlock Holmes? I don't know about any of you, but I'm not about to investigate it or do whatever it is you plan to do," Tristan said, making it clear that he wanted nothing to do with it. For Tristan, his main goal was now the mastermind behind the Kanima, and his patience wasn't something anyone could keep up with. Vote. Chapter 77, Chapter 74. Argent's house. Gerard, the 50-plus-year-old hardened Argent patriarch, sat in his study with a few books in front of him that he silently flipped over after scrutinizing the data and its value in respect to their current situation. The door to his study creaked open halfway as Chris stepped inside the room to see his father still flipping books after ardently going at them for more than 5 hours now. "You're not going to get some sleep?" he said while resting his back against the wall as he trained his eyes over each of his father's actions. "I will get some sleep when I'm sure it's safe to do so," Gerard said without looking at Chris' direction, and continued flipping through the pages of the books while Chris watched, father and son saying nothing for over half an hour before Gerard finally closed the books on his table except one. "I examined the wounds myself of the decaying corpse and also read through the autopsy report. Couple that with your own observations and testimonies, I think we can say for sure that it is a vampire," Gerard said in a rare somber tone that pushed all his grandfatherly facade aside. "Given that all your reports clearly highlight the fact that it only appeared during confrontations, and also taking the behavior of their kind into account, then we can deduce that it has a grudge against the Alpha," Gerard said as he thought of all the behavioral tics and even the subconscious ones of the most elusive supernatural creature the world has ever seen. "The first thing we have to do is identify which vampiric species it belongs to before we start fashioning a weakness to it." Chris just silently listened and made a note of everything Gerard was saying, and only when he had finished did Chris speak out. "Just how dangerous are they?" At his son's question, Gerard looked at the book in front of him and then closed his eyes in reminiscence of his past experience with the accursed species. "They are fast, agile, nimble, and above all very decisive when it comes to going for the kill. Everything about them is dangerous, from their fangs and claws down to their gaze, and just the fact that there are numerous different variants of the same species make it imperative that you find out the one you are dealing with and plan accordingly. You want my honest opinion on them? Simple. If you see them, turn the other way and run. You have no chance against them unless you are prepared. Chris took in a deep breath as the weight of his father's words pressed down on his mind. Remembering how it had killed 2 of his men even when the entire squad of them were being cautious only served to further increase his apprehension of the creature his father was speaking of. Gerard's voice croaked as he stood up from the chair he had been sitting on. Well, we can only plan our approach to kill it step by step, but until then, I think it's time for me to catch my sleep and not be late for my new job as Allison's school principal. Haha, I wonder how she'll react when she finds out. He laughed again as he made his way toward his room to get some shut-eye before the morning rays sneak in. Chris shook his head at his father's irony before leaving the study and going to his room to join his wife. Vampire hunting can come later. What the foo *k. Both Tristan and Allison's reactions were the same as they were left flabbergasted at the news that their former principal was just transferred, and Allison's grandfather immediately resumed as their new principal. I thought your family only deal in weapons and related firearms. Tristan asked, but the person he was saying that to was too embarrassed to look anyone in the face. No other picture could be painted from this action other than a clear tell that the Argents were finally serious about cracking down on any supernatural present in the school. For those in the know, i.e. those supernaturally inclined, this move of Gerard was like a predatorial hawk openly stalking their safe zone, taunting them to make a move if they dared. Allison turned around and found Tristan and Malia looking at her with a blunt questioning gaze that made the entire thing more awkward since a large amount of the student body was also looking at her. I had no flipping idea. No one told me anything. She hastily defended before any of them got the wrong idea, something she ardently hoped they didn't. It was quite funny how the Argent heiress, someone who lost all smiles during her training making her look like the perfect cold porcelain doll, became quite flustered when faced with the 2 judgmental stares of her 2 younger friends. As long as your grandpa doesn't add more subjects to the syllabus then we cool. Being the simple-minded one, Malia focused on the part that was at least in their control. Unlike what the students thought, nothing of importance actually happened with the change of the school principal as classes went on without any foreign element being introduced. Malia followed Tristan as he went for the afternoon lacrosse practice, and on their way they came across Allison, who was coming out of Gerard's office with a somewhat imperceptible stiff smile on her face. Gerard looked at the 2 teens that stopped as they saw his granddaughter and, quickly reading the glances they shared, made a guess as to who they were. Friends of yours? He asked his granddaughter. Allison nodded and introduced the 2 of them to Gerard, who finally realized who they were. My son mentioned the both of you in some of our talks. I guess thanks are in order for helping little Allison here settle in without any awkwardness. He showed his gratitude with a grandfatherly genial smile that gave the impression of a typical neighborhood older generation. Don't sweat it, Gramps. Malia politely waved off his thanks, much to Allison's further embarrassment and Tristan's resignation. We're currently heading to the field, so... Oh, no, don't let me hold you young ones back. Hope to see you soon. He waved at them but then remembered something and called them back as they turned away to leave. I've been reviewing the students' academic performance, and while I'm new and don't want to spoil my already low rapport with the students, I have to say that your grade assessment is severely lacking. He genuinely advised them. In favor of impartiality, I would suggest that the both of you focus more time on your studies to avoid being held a year back, and disappoint not just your guardians but your friends also. Allison looked extremely uncomfortable at this point as Gerard called out Tristan's and Malia's lacking academic results. Have fun out there. He smiled at them and went back into his office, leaving the 3 of them standing there. That guy definitely knows how to be blunt. Tristan remarked as he continued his way to the practice field. Malia huffed in displeasure, feeling a bit targeted by Gerard's advice. Allison, you're helping me out after school hours. And no, you don't get to say otherwise. She concluded while her victim just shrugged, already used to her friend's selfish demands. Tristan, however, was frowning inwardly after one of Gerard's words repeated itself in his mind. If he was reviewing their academic records, as the seasoned hunter that he no doubt was, it wouldn't be hard for him to pick 1 or 2 clues from the teacher's assessments of certain students. Mainly Scott, Isaac, and Derek's most recent beta, Erica. In case it wasn't said or stressed upon, the physical and psychological evolution a person undergoes to become a werewolf was very noticeable. As clear as a mirror image. The most damning thing was Isaac and Erica, who were recently turned, after Kate's burial. There was no way their change could go unnoticed by the students and the teachers, especially not when Isaac's father's death had the police involved, as slash marks were found all over his dead body. That bastard! Tristan cursed after remembering that Derek actually brought the both of them to his house. There's no way Gerard doesn't have them under his sights. His mind wasn't entirely on the game as his thoughts wandered towards the possible actions Gerard could take to draw the alpha out. The reason he was this cautious of Gerard was because not only Satomi but Elias and the other older members of the pack had warned him on numerous occasions to be wary of the Argent family patriarch. Sure, he eclipsed whatever a human could be, stronger, faster, more durable and a host of other supernatural abilities. What they always never failed to remind him of was the simple fact that while they were the apex predators, the Argents were hunters. Despite the overwhelming advantages supernatural creatures have over the entire human race, the indisputable fact remained that they were hunted and permanently forced into hiding by humans who called themselves hunters. The vampire species were said to have been hunted almost into extinction by humans. Just because he wasn't afraid of Gerard doesn't mean that he wasn't cautious of what the man could do. Someone just increased the survival difficulty. Chapter 78, Chapter 75. Unlike what he had half expected, Gerard didn't immediately crack down on any supernatural as far as he knew, since Erica and Isaac were still comfortable in school, although being a little exposing. The two of them were reveling in their new life and the thrilling sensations and the confidence boost that came with it. Isaac went from a frail wimpy kid with constant eye bags suffering from social anxiety to one of the better lacrosse players and having the attention of a good number of the female students showered on him. The boy practically turned into an Adonis in the span of a week. No hate though. On the other hand, Erica went from the recluse weird wrinkled girl suffering from a severe case of epilepsy to a bombshell straight out of a porn site in the same time frame. Every step she took turned heads and the number of boys lining up to try their shots with her was ever extending. In fact, she drew more attention than Isaac, which was a given her new fashion choice of tight short leather clothes and seductive red lipstick and a complete cosmetic overhaul. At least the one thing they did in his opinion was that they stayed the foo *k away from him and acted as if they had no idea who he was other than the basic student acquaintanceship. Whether it was an order from Derek or because they probably did not want to be in a familiar zone with their natural enemy, whatever their reasons were, Tristan fully supported it. But then again, they really might have nothing serious to be worried about. He thought. Anyone who had the information and paid attention to the nature and the duration of their change will come to the obvious conclusion that they are new betas, so maybe they are not the only ones Gerard is looking for. The Argents surrounded the school on the night of the winter formal, a good while before Isaac and Erica's transformation, so they obviously have it on good grounds that there are older betas in the school who were involved in the whole Kate fiasco. As if trying to kill Jackson's master, whoever the sucker is not already a full course on my plate. You've been staring at Isaac and Erica for a while now, something on your mind about them? Boyd asked as he separated some of the greens in his lunch, already having caught Tristan's extended stare at the new sensational duo's direction. Malia looked at the direction Tristan was staring and shrugged in indifference at it, knowing she could probably guess what was going through his head. Nah, it's nothing. Tristan replied offhandedly and focused back on his plate. Boyd, being naturally curious like the rest of the student body about the transformational changes of the subject duo, made his curiosity known. Do you have any idea what might have happened to them? He asked. It's definitely something groundbreaking than simply changing your skincare routine. And how would I know? Maybe they picked up some Taoist books and started practicing self-improvement. I heard they have good meditation and self-esteem practices. Tristan spoke while taking a cursory glance at their direction. Boyd groaned after hearing Tristan's reply. I seriously can't tell if you are being sarcastic or actually being serious. He was about to drop it, but upon seeing Erica's looks and thinking that there was no way Tristan would be interested in Isaac, he came to his own conclusion and his mouth automatically flowed with the thoughts in his head. Are you checking out Erica? The table, which was only filled with the systematic sound of cutlery hitting plates, immediately disappeared as the two silent female occupants put down their cutleries and looked between Boyd and Tristan. Couldn't think of anything else to say, Boyd? Was what his face said as he looked at his first male friend. Due to being too immersed in whatever his mind was concocting, Boyd failed to realize that gaze he was receiving and continued unperturbed. I mean, I get why everyone is suddenly tripping all over for her. He said as he looked at the girl who currently had a small smile on her face as she ate an apple, somehow painting a seductive picture with very simple actions. Just the story of a regular unpopular girl turned high school vixen is bound to draw the egos of guys like magnets, since everyone suddenly gets this drive to quickly claim this polished gold. The more he spoke, the more the intensity of the looks reduced, but that in no way inspired any feeling of safety in Tristan for his friend. Just shut your damn mouth, Boyd. It's already bad you indirectly made it about me, so why are you putting yourself in such a malicious crosshair? Conveniently oblivious, Boyd still gave his astute opinions. She's definitely up there with Lydia in the hotness category, but I think she has her beat in spiciness. Dunno, but I feel like she really got that dangerous air around her. Guys dig mysterious girls too, you know. Tristan just ate his food unperturbed while also listening to what Boyd was saying. Regardless of his personal feelings, he had to say Boyd was shockingly right in his observations. And how does all that make you think I'm checking her out? Tristan couldn't help but voice his curiosity. Other than me thinking she checks out a lot of boxes for any guy, I mean apart from hanging out with Isaac, no one said anything about her being with another guy. I think you could totally get her if you want, there's not a lot of girls like her in Beacon Hills High. He returned to his food with the same affable attitude, ignoring the stares he was getting, unfortunately. Is that the type of girl you like, Tristan? Allison, who had been silent for the most part, finally spoke. Boyd raised his head and waited a few seconds before the consequences of his words finally clicked in. He wanted to speak in a weakly constructed defense, but the three bored, yet somehow threatening, look they gave him made him sew his lips up. Not appearing flustered by the question, even when knowing Malia was interested in his answer just as much as Allison was, he gave Erica a brief appraising glance before turning back to his food. No doubt, she's become really beautiful, but it's not as if it's just about having a beautiful face. Even if we can work on compatibility, I don't think there's any instance of me approaching her for anything substantial, talk less a relationship. That's also not a definite answer to the question of if she's your type. Allison pressed, unrelenting. Tristan sighed in irritation, explicitly directed at everyone on their table and those listening in, so he just sprinkled a dash of effort to make his point clear. Based on looks? Yes, definitely. She's a lot of guys' type. As for whether I see myself starting a relationship with her in any way? That's practically impossible for a scant few reasons. One being she's not Malia. Simple, absurd, and true. He looked at the three of them, noting all their expressions, fully disregarding Boyd's sour look, not surprised at Malia openly radiating the smugness she was feeling, and Allison looked a little down but waiting for him to finish speaking. As for another, it's because I don't care about her, in any meaningful definition of the word. I mean it's an honest no-brainer that at least any modicum of affection, even the tiniest bit, is the most needed catalyst for any relationship to start, whether good or bad. Not to mention Boyd, who looked like he ate a live eel, he too felt uncomfortable speaking in such a way that was uncharacteristic of him. These types of talks were the ones he would have with Malia in the comfort of their room. And it stays in there. Deciding to end it there as he felt he made himself as clear and crisp as universally possible, he added a closing remark. It's actually pretty simple and it applies to everybody else. For me to be in another relationship, the girl has to make me care about her enough to subconsciously consider it and then show me or make me feel like she's better than Malia in every damn way. That's, you sound ultimately whipped man, no offense. Tristan laughed at the way Boyd phrased his words. He might have sounded like that to anybody who had listened to his words, but that was when someone tried to interpret it in some overly complicated way. Does he like Malia? An indisputable fact. Has he ever met a girl he was sexually and romantically attracted to more than Malia? No. If there comes a day where he meets a girl who he likes and said girl meant so much to him that it completely undermines all the emotions he had and years spent together with Malia, he doubted he would have any other decision than falling for her. Elias had once said to them, the younger cubs in the pack, that falling in love was one of the most helpless feelings one can ever experience. You just have to accept it for all it is, both the joys of oneness and the heart-wrenching pains of separation. He could fight a lot of things, humans and supernatural creatures alike, but there was nothing he could do in the face of an inevitability, and he was fine with that. Why fight what you have no power against? Only a conceited fool would do that. That was all based on the assumption that he finds another girl he loves more than Malia. As for being factual, if asked whether that was any chance, no matter how small, that he would love someone else more than Malia, then his answer would be a simple no. That was an inevitability of itself. No one said another word and just went through their food. While on a few tables away from they, Erica had an irritated scowl on her face after hearing all that was said. Chapter 79, Chapter 76. After that entire circus of an interrogation in the cafeteria, Tristan and the other lacrosse players were reminded of an upcoming game which caused Coach to thoroughly put them through the ringer. The resident vampire was one of the few who didn't complain, as it helped him burn more of his excess energy than on a normal day. As for Jackson and the Kanima, well, Derek and his pack were keeping an eye on him without the self-conceited lacrosse co-captain knowing anything about it. So far the deaths have been pretty low, which made Derek and Isaac believe that the killings might be systematic. Otherwise there was no way it would have come back to kill the same person after having escaped from their hands once. Honestly, he had no idea on how he was to go about withdrawing the Kanima's master out, which was why he left it for the pack that wanted to kill it. It took convincing Derek to not outright kill Jackson, since what they wanted was the master, and not to mention that they would have to catch him first to kill him, and he's already run quite the gauntlet on Derek's pack, not once but twice. It's not as if their choices concerning the Kanima were that extensive. If the Kanima and its master prove hard to catch, then they'll just take their first choice and kill Jackson while he's still human. So while everyone put Jackson's life on probation, he remained blissfully unaware of his ticking time. Truly, ignorance is bliss. The night of the game came, and like usual, everyone who attended were in high spirits, as this was the semi-finals of the first tournament season of the year. Tristan looked amused as he saw Coach being the one in the highest spirits, as he believed that there was nothing that could stop the immaculate lineup of the Beacon Hills Cyclones this year. They had Tristan, McCall, and Whitmore, high school pro players that have mastered the art of piercing the enemy's defense with slippery ease. Not to mention the other players that he could trust to hold the fort down should any hiccups occur. Danny, Boyd, LaHaye, who was showing surprising talent, and maybe even still in ski. When you step into that field, the only thing I want to hear besides the benign cheers is the pained groans of our enemies as we crush whatever laughable sticks and britches they raise up as defense. Coach addressed the team, who were all looking hyped up despite his questionable words. Well, he's coach. Break them. Destroy them. Trample on them so hard that even their supporters won't know when they start cheering our names. Yeah. Now go on there and give them their final burial rites. Oh. You have to admit that he really has a way with his players. Or maybe it's a coach thing in general. Tristan muttered as he jogged his way to his starting position. Whistle. The game kicked off without much suspense, and the morale of the two teams clashed as soon as the ball was touched, and all hell broke loose for the players, but for those on the stands? Prime entertainment. Steal that ball the same way you stole your parents' affection from your older siblings. Without wasting even a second, both team coaches started shouting smartly censored words at their players, igniting the first part of the game, weakening the opponent's morale. With two supernaturals, Tristan and Scott, and a prime lacrosse player in Jackson, the three of them raked in early goals to put the team as far ahead as they could while everyone was still brimming with energy. Who the foo*** is that guy? Someone on Tristan's team exclaimed after being mercilessly tackled to the ground when he tried scoring. Tell me about it. Jackson said with a frown as he looked at the player. Eddie Abramovitz. They call him the Abomination, and I can see why. Seriously? Dude looks like a jacked grown-ass dude. Even Tristan frowned as he saw how the player they were talking about crammed through their players as if they were paper bricks. Since this was a human sport, it was obvious that every supernatural on the team was being extra cautious and holding back their strength so they wouldn't mistakenly snap their opponent's bones, or even outright kill them. It was a very grim possibility. He held back a ridiculous amount, as did Scott, so he expertly used his senses to dodge the huge player to avoid a head-on collision and make people wonder how he took down a guy that big. You got any idea how to get rid of that guy? He saw an out-of-breath Styles beside him breathing heavily. The other players who were around listened in case anyone had a solution. They couldn't leave the attack to a select few people after all, as that was bad sportsmanship. Two people could do a light touch pass, and if he moves to defend, they will ram into him. Might not game him down with the first hit, but he'll definitely be cautious and tone down his false bravado. Tristan suggested, and everyone fell silent for a few seconds before they reacted. Yeah. Bring that ass here, boy. They all gave a rousing shout and took their place for the next pass, each ready to put in the plan to take the giant of a teenager down. On the stands of the stadium, Malia sat with Lori and Zhang, who came to watch Tristan's game, a good distance away from where Allison sat awkwardly with her grandfather. Malia didn't need Satomi's warning, or anyone's for that matter, after seeing how Allison acted in front of the man. Nervous, fearful, and sometimes extreme caution. For someone being trained as a hunter, the heiress in fact, to show such reactions to her own grandfather, definitely a blaring red flag. Ooh, that gotta hurt some. Zhang said as he saw a player do a 480 in the air before crashing to the ground. Well, that's the only enjoyable part of the game. Malia snickered, relishing the live entertainment playing in front of her. Zhang snorted at Malia's words. Of course, only an animal like you will call that enjoyable. He dodged the elbow Malia sent to his sides without even looking at it, already accustomed to most of her replies to certain types of comments. That's Gerard? You guys sure have it worse having someone like him as your principal. Laurie remarked after stealing an unnoticeable look at Gerard. Malia turned to the younger girl and asked, "You know him?" But Laurie shook her head along with a dismissive hand wave. "Just small talk. After Satomi adopted me and Brett, that was a few years before the Hail Fire, hunters were kinda prominent then and we used to hear a lot of things about the hunting family of the hills." Laurie narrated a few things she knew and heard back them which were mostly just stories and rumors spread through the supernatural community of Beacon Hills. Even Zhang nodded to her words as he too heard those things. There was this one story about Gerard Argent driving out an entire supernatural community from a town in Dakota. Old Gramps is like the bogeyman for young werewolves. Laurie finished with a chuckle as she watched Tristan weave through two defending players, making them crash into each other, before hitting another goal for the home team. Malia did not dismiss the words of Laurie for the simple reason that she knew that rumors didn't start from nowhere. Even if it's not as outrageous as driving out an entire supernatural community from their home, she did not for a second doubt that the man must have done quite a few notable things to become renowned like that. Rumors don't begin with whines after all. Another thing was that the Argents weren't moving all that much these days. She was a supernatural creature that lived their lives in hunting and killing their prey with the slightest chance they got, so she easily recognized when someone was sharpening their fangs before a swift hunt. There would be no huge fanfare in this one or a drawn-out battle. They will try to eliminate their prey once any windows open. "Damn, you guys are really good!" Laurie exclaimed as she saw the difference gap in the scoreboard. Is that idiot supposed to be doing something that reckless?" Laurie's exclamation refocused Malia and Jiang's attention on the field where two of the opponent's players were lying on the ground and visibly groaning and grunting in pain, but that wasn't what caused Laurie's shocked reaction. The cause for it was no other than the guy who was currently releasing a feral air that they easily recognized as that of a werewolf on the edge. Isaac LaHaye was about to lose his rationale. Chapter 80, Chapter 77. It all started when Tristan's idea started going well, in fact too well, that the big-muscled tank on the other team started feeling irritated after the fourth goal was scored with the strategy which later turned in a full pissed-off mode after the seventh goal was scored, and not by any of the more notable players of Beacon Hills. It started with a few light tappings that bothered on the edge of foul plays, but since it wasn't overboard or actually extreme, none one said anything as a certain level of aggression was part of the game. Upon seeing the ever-increasing score gap and the angry shouts of his own teammates, he blew his top and started ramming straight into any incoming players, and one of them just so happened to be Isaac. Long story short, another McCall episode repeated itself in Isaac after being targeted for the second time with a wicked shove, and like the newly changed werewolf he was, his tolerance limit was very low. Isaac ignored Scott's warning and set in a play for goal with payback in mind, and just as expected, the abomination Eddie Abramovitz set his sights on another brutal takedown only for his world to be rocked after being run through by a boy half his size. His world spun for a few seconds before he landed squarely on the ground with a worrying thud. Tristan just watched and shook his head, not knowing why an alpha would allow his beta, one less than a month old, to play a very aggressive game. A major one no less. "Someone call a doctor or something. I think he broke something," Coach shouted as he tried accessing the nature of the injury. "Make way, excuse me. I'm a nurse." A woman pushed her way through the crowding congregation. "Make room. Give me some space." Tristan moved back to the bench and just sat there while the others watched the injured player get bandaged up and carried away. He just watched as Gerard perfectly played the worried principal and tried to calm the minds of the worried team and well-wishers. The reason he thought of Gerard's act as perfectly played was the air of nonchalance around him that did not fit with the placating words coming out from his mouth. One might completely miss it, but Tristan can't, as the way he read emotions was different than how others did. While werewolves could pick up on emotions and other related stuff, it had to be concentrated to a degree for them to pick it up. It also worked in conjunction with pulse reading and perceiving the emitted pheromones. For Tristan, however, what he smelt was the state of the blood. You can fake your pulse and force yourself into a false emotion, but you can't trick your own blood. It is your biological signature. He signaled Malia along with Laurie and Zhang to remain where they were. If before he could say that there was a chance that Isaac and Erica were overlooked as just a normal teenage glow-up, or that puberty came late, Isaac's move just now just destroyed that sailing ship. Not only was he uninjured and perfectly fine, he ran away as soon as he got a semblance of control. He turned around to see if they were going to resume the game that was as good as won in his opinion, only for him to be called by Coach. "Hayes, did you see Jackson? He asked for a timeout and I wanted him to escort Mrs. McCall to the infirmary." I have no idea where he ran off to, coach. He couldn't even say he did not expect a development like this. Give me the key, coach. We've got the game already in the bag, so I'll escort the nurse to the infirmary before the ambulance gets here. Coach could not argue with Tristan's sound logic, so he gave him the keys without any question, but not before giving out a few colorful words to compliment Jackson's show of incompetence. After escorting the rather cheery and carefree woman who was Scott's mother to the infirmary with the injured Eddie on his back, he first made sure that Melissa didn't have any need for his assistance before pulling the bathroom card that never seems to get old. I'll be back in a few. Don't worry, take your time. You deserve it after that splendid gameplay. Melissa said as she waved him off to go take care of whatever he wanted to do, which she was 100% sure was not a bathroom break. She knew how teenagers think. Tristan didn't dally and immediately expanded his senses, which was basically a blood-based sonar, and couldn't help but once again curse teenagers and their raging libido. Trying to pick them out from their heat level proved useless due to the number of teenagers doing some strenuous exercise in different classrooms. Seeing that heat wouldn't work, he flipped it over and tried feeling for the cold slithering sensation of the Kanima's blood. Got you. Isaac was currently running from a transformed Jackson, and he could feel two other people quickly making their way towards Isaac's location. Guess the whole squad is already here. He slowed down his speed and tried focusing on another thing, which was trying to find if he could pick up anything that felt remotely similar to the Kanima. Its master was in the game, but that still didn't help narrow it down. It's like finding a dude with no idea what he looks like out of a sea of a few thousand people. Trying but failing to yield any sort of positive result, he put it aside and made his way towards where the Kanima was having a 1v3, a 1v2 against Derek and Isaac. Since they were in another part of the school, he didn't have to worry about someone mistakenly finding them out. He perched atop a ledge and watched as the Kanima easily held its own against Derek and Isaac. The main cause was because none of them were as fast and nimble as the Kanima. Even its strength was more than that of a normal werewolf or an alpha. He watched as the lizard eventually got Isaac and made him tag out of the fight, and that was when he decided to intervene. Free falling from the ledge, he trained his eyes to the back of the Kanima, but it looked like the Kanima's intuition kicked into play as it jumped away from its former position and climbed up the nearest wall. I thought you weren't going to help, Derek said, then snorted as he saw the overgrown lizard snarl at the both of them from the wall it perched on. I really want to kill this thing and be done with it, he complained. Tristan didn't respond to Derek's words but kept his eyes unmoving on the form of the Kanima. Are you still planning on fighting it or retreating? You're making it sound as if I shouldn't think of fighting it. Derek uttered those words with displeasure clear as day in his voice, and his face set in the grumpy frowning face Tristan knew him of. He nodded easily to Derek's words and clearly enunciated his next words. If I wasn't here, then you would have joined those two on the ground, paralyzed and at its mercy. A pretty dumb way to go out if you ask me. But Derek wasn't just about to accept his words and tauntingly asked him. And? You think you're the only one who can take him on? Unfortunately for him, such taunts had absolutely no effect on Tristan. He replied to Derek with the same calm tone he was known for speaking with. My speed gives me an even advantage, so there's that. He also grows stronger the more he carries out vengeance. You think I don't know that? Why do you think I want to kill Jackson's stupid ass in the first place? Derek half shouted. He remembered a little bit about the characteristics of the creature known as the Kanima, having read about it in his childhood days. Why was he leaving Jackson alive again? Maybe the fact that he wanted to try tasting his blood for once, or maybe also the fact that they'll lose the secretive master. The reason why he was bothering himself with the Kanima? It was the way Satomi had brought them up. Letting grass grow out of control in your backyard is bound to draw in snakes. It was also why Derek was concerned about it. This was their territory, and no supernatural had the right to cause unwarranted chaos. The Kanima slowly started climbing backwards, picking the retreating option since both he and his master vividly remembered the loss they ate at Tristan's hands the both times they fought him. Seeing the Kanima gone, Tristan turned to Derek and said what was on his mind. If you want to kill Jackson, then go ahead. This part of Beacon Hills can be said to be your territory, so do whatever you think is best. Tristan spoke out while scratching the back of his head. Oh, and I think Gerard's got his eyes on Isaac after the stunt he pulled during the game. Isaac, who was slowly recovering his motor functions, froze as he heard that, something that caught Derek's full attention. What are you going to do now, Tristan? Derek called out to Tristan, who had already walked a healthy distance away. The bloodsucker gave a no gesture as he continued walking away. We just won our semi-finals, so maybe celebrate like the rest? That or go home early and figure out what next to do after I wake up. Fair. Derek looked at his two betas and forced down the creeping sigh, sneakily climbing the ladder up his throat, and went and helped them up before taking them back to his hideout. Chapter 81, Chapter 78. He was already fed up with everything that was happening around him, so rapidly so that it felt as if everything was moving while it stagnated. And then the thing he dreaded the most happened. What did you say? Jackson's the Kanima, and we're killing him, and you are going to help us. He looked appalled as he heard Derek repeat the words he thought he had misheard. Why? He had ended up shouting, which made Derek's eyes narrow, along with that of Isaac and Erica, but he was too focused on Derek's words to quickly notice. He's already killed 4 people, Scott. He's only going to continue growing stronger the more he kills, and not to mention the fact that he killed a hunter the other day, he is being controlled by someone to carry out a bloody vendetta. Derek patiently explained to Scott in hopes of getting Scott to understand where they stood, but he overlooked a simple fact. Unlike Erica and Isaac, whose minds could easily be warped and affected from the bite, also the fact that they were bitter teenagers, Scott on the other hand was a very sheltered child with rock-steady morals. We have to stop him now before his killings go out of hand. Doing so will also draw out whoever is controlling him. He added. Scott looked at Derek, and then at Isaac and Erica, and what he felt from them was complete apathy when it came to killing a teenager like them. I can't. He said, looking at Derek dead in the eyes. What? I said I can't. I won't help you kill Jackson. Derek groaned at Scott's bullheadedness. He's not some innocent victim, Scott. He's killed people. Not by choice, you said it yourself that he's been controlled. He countered. Derek sighed, knowing that he couldn't change Scott's mind as it was. What an infuriating beta. Guess in death you still find ways to annoy me, Peter. So what are you going to do? It's obvious, isn't it? Scott said and released a low growl, showing that he has already shifted to his werewolf form. I'm going to stop you from killing him. Derek raised his hand to stop Isaac and Erica, who were already baring their fangs, and looked at Scott with an amused smile and asked. Are you sure you want to stand against me, Scott? Scott didn't falter even as his furs stood in their ends, acutely warning him of the danger of his answer. Yes, I am. Well then, that's too bad. Derek muttered as the smile left his face and his eyes lit up in scarlet red. Too bad indeed. Before Scott could make any sort of movement, his eyes spun in a dizzy spell and pain assaulted his sides. His eyes gained their balance and then confusion as he found himself on the ground. Do you know the other reason betas like being in a pack and follow an alpha? Scott gasped as Derek lifted him up by the neck and looked him dead in the eye. It's because the pack gives them direction, a sense of purpose if you will, that increases their bond with the pack, strengthening them even further. Scott gasped as Derek drove a knee to his stomach, after which he felt a hot searing pain across his chest, only for him to look down and see bloody claws gashes across his chest. Arg! The pain was so much that it made his reasoning snap, and the only thing that remained in his mind was to kill Derek. Not caring about Scott's mental state, Derek continued speaking. That is exactly what you lack, Scott. It's something that Erica and Isaac have, meaning it will only take time before they become stronger than you. Make up your mind, Scott. Do you want to become my beta, or would you rather be an omega? What he got as a response was the roar of a berserk werewolf, which elicited a chuckle out of him. Quite the unruly one, aren't you? Scott rushed at him, but Derek leisurely dodged what he perceived as a weak attempt to maim him. Meanwhile, Erica and Isaac looked on with apprehension, as even they could feel wariness just by looking at Scott's ferocity, an acute tell of the danger the beta possessed should they fight against him. Then they looked at Derek, who was dodging and turning Scott's body to a bloody rag without any transformation except his red eyes and claws, with an expression of eerie boredom. Scott fell to his knees and his transformation came undone. His face was pale with the amount of blood he had lost and the weakness that came with being injured by an alpha. You won't survive long with such a weak resolve, Scott. Derek said, his voice showing a plea for understanding. You are no longer human, Scott, unfortunately you are not. Those were the last words Scott remembered hearing before he blacked out from the fatigue. Tristan Hayes POV. And that's wraps for the Battle of Gettysburg. I breathed out after finally managing to finish the history assignment from the day before about an essay on one of the country's past battles/wars fought. I even skipped training for today just so I can finish the assignment. Allison's grandfather wasn't taking any chances, and being part of the lacrosse team could not be used as leeway for failing a few courses. Coach even threatened to bench me for the next matches if I don't get my grades up. I was about to wrap up for the day when somebody skidded to a stop in front of me, sending unhealthy amounts of panic signals that could trigger a panic attack. Tristan, I finally found why you. He said through raspy breaths. Anyone could tell from his sweaty appearance and heavy breaths that he was thoroughly shaken. Can I help you with anything, Stilinski? He nodded and pointed in a direction before managing to gasp out what he wanted to say. Scott. He needs help. I think he's dying. I frowned at that, my mind already going through what even I would consider the worst scenarios. I could tell Stilinski wasn't lying. With the way he looked and the way his emotions flared around like a painter's palette, he'd have better luck forming a coherent sentence than lying in such a state. What happened to him? I remained standing and asked him. Me helping McCall out from whatever deathbed he is lying on will depend on what actually put him there. Derek. He fought Derek. Now that's an interesting twist. Did Derek finally lose it and put his own beta on death's door? Not surprising, McCall was absent from school, so Stilinski took me to his house after I made sure no one was watching me from the school. Gerard. The moment I stepped through his door, I felt a tiny prick on my skin and a sniff of the air told me that the house was lined with mountain ash. Smart? I could already smell the rotten flesh and helplessness of a limping prey struggling to escape a stalking predator. Can people please learn how to finish off their kill? I muttered as I followed behind Stilinski to McCall's room. There on his bed was the sweaty and bandaged boy, struggling to take in breaths of air. Please, do you know what's happening to him? He's been like this since morning and his wounds aren't healing. I leaned in closer and cut open a part of the bandages with a flick of my claws and looked closely at the wound. Well, oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Stilinski came to my side and looked at the wounds before grimacing. Is it a good oh shit or a bad oh shit? I looked at him with a half-confused, slightly amused expression. When has an oh shit ever been a good thing? Oh shit. He said as realization dawned on him. But there has to be something you can do, right? Please. He begged, but looking at the wounds, while there was indeed something I could do, I wasn't going to do it as I had no interest in taking his pain as mine. The problem isn't from the wounds but from Scott himself. I don't understand. What do you mean by that? He's stopping himself from healing because of an emotional imbalance. A psychological to physiological effect. He asked and I nodded. From the emotions I'm feeling from him, it's mostly guilt, lack of confidence, self-blame, and lastly a good dose of despair. I then looked at McCall, who was trying to listen to me. What's killing you is a self of identity, more specifically a supernatural identity. Your supernatural side has nothing to hold onto or drive it forward. That is what is killing you. His eyes dimmed and it was then that I finally understood what must have gotten him into such a state. Must all werewolves kill? Is it a must that we must become killers? No, it's not. I said, and then continued before his hope could get any higher. It's just that those who are prepared to kill are the ones who live longer. Don't make the mistake of thinking of the supernatural world as the same with the human world. It's literary survival of the fittest for us. Our law follows the rule of the jungle. He let out a self-deprecating laugh as he heard what I said. In other words, I'll have to kill. I shook my head at him. Not necessarily. You only need to be strong enough to make the choice of whether or not to kill when faced against someone who wants to kill you. He fell silent as he digested my words, but I wasn't done. Remember, there's no one to exact justice for any wrong done to you. No judge, only an executioner if you are not strong enough. What happened to Derek is a prime example, so when you make your choice, remember that it's not just for you but for those around you as well. Your wounds will start healing once you fix the shambles in your mind. Tashi Delak, good luck, Scott McCall. With that I left the both of them to rethink their life choices. Chapter 82, Chapter 79. Malia walked into Boyd, who was leaning on his locker, and eyed him in contemplation before throwing away whatever she had thought in her head to the side, and traced Boyd's line of sight and found Erica laughing coquettishly while surrounded by 3 boys who she had wrapped around her fingers without any of the losers knowing. Is that what you're into? She asked just to be sure. Kinda. Boyd replied absent-mindedly, but then jolted to standing straight before turning around to find Malia with a honest smirk on her face. You could have let me know you were behind me the whole time, you know. And interrupt you gawking at your crush? Hell no. She wasn't being mean or sarcastic. These were her honest thoughts. Are you going to shoot your shot? She asked, referring to Erica. Probably not. I know when my will get wrecked and I'm not about to go through that. He said and then proceeded to pick a few books for next classes. You don't really think I'll get a chance with her, do you? Malia shrugged. You might or might not, who knows. Anyway, catch you later. She said and left him there before he sighed and got on with his day. Malia was in a good mood today because the results from a few of their assessments came in and she was giddy as all her hard work in studying finally paid off. Of the 4 subjects that have revealed the students' scores, she got a B, 2 CS, and a D. It was a far cry from the numerous DS and constant ES she got with cherry pickings of FS. She still hadn't seen Tristan's scores but she was sure it was better or the same as hers since he was the one who most times dragged her to study. She was still in her thoughts when someone crashed into her and tried walking off after a few shouts of sorry. Upon seeing who crashed into her, she frowned and used one of the books in her hands to throw at them. Ouch! The hell, Malia? Allison, who had been broken out of her thoughts, looked at the person who threw a book at her head. Sorry, I didn't see you there. She apologized, knowing why her best friend had hit her on the head, even though it hurt a lot. Obviously. What's gotten into you lately? You've been spacing out quite a lot for the past few days. Malia said, concern showing on her face. Allison looked shocked, inwardly berating herself for forgetting to pay attention to how she looked outside, especially knowing fully well how observant all her friends were, even Boyd. It's complicated. Family problems. Gotcha. Malia nodded in understanding. Given who the other party was, it was pretty easy to tell what was going on with her once you factor in her family. Allison smiled wryly at Malia's astute observation but unfortunately she couldn't stay for long. You going somewhere? Allison nodded. I'm spending the afternoon with my grandfather. She mentally applauded herself for not cringing as she said that, never knowing whether to call him grandfather or principal when in school. Oh, then no problem. But before you go, have you seen Trist? Haven't seen him since morning. Allison shook her head before going along on her way. Unfortunately for Malia, the morning was just not in her favor as Lydia Martin stood in front of her just seconds after Allison left. Just who I wanted to see. She cocked a brow at Lydia's words but Lydia didn't care or did not notice as she just carried on. Have you seen Tristan? I've been looking for him everywhere. Why are you looking for Tristan? Lydia shrugged her shoulders and stated her reason. What? I just wanted to spend some time with him. You and Allison do it all the time, why can't I? She said with a straight face, not minding how much her words could be misinterpreted, which Malia had a suspicion she did on purpose. And I'm not supposed to ask why you want to spend some time with Tristan. It was as if this girl made it her sole goal of frustrating her with her insane words. It's not as if you ask everybody why they want to spend some time with him. Are you okay? This time she asked in concern because this wasn't what she expected from Lydia. Why wouldn't I be? Just on a few medications, that's all. Ah. Malia finally understood why the girl was acting out of character and a little unhinged. Are you sure you should be in school when you are on such heavy medications? Lydia for the first time showed genuine surprise and also confusion. Is that worry I hear in your voice? Malia just stared at her as if asking are you dumb, which made Lydia nod. Yup, this was the Malia she knew. I'm only pointing out the fact that with how inebriated you are, you can be easily influenced and get foo*ked. But then again, maybe you might not care too much about that. Malia gave Lydia a look over and made note of how the dress she wore was scandalously small and tight. Apart from her shoes, every piece of clothing she wore was 2 sizes too small. The tube top just covered her rather generous chest, ending just under it, while the skirt she wore, if it could be called that, was just below her ass, tightly packing it up and putting it out. The only thing she wore that was considerate was the jacket. Lydia frowned at Malia's words, even more by the look Malia gave her and snorted loudly for her to hear. I'm not some 2-bit whore. Malia didn't have a single change in her expression as she replied in an even tone that was dripping with sarcasm. You could have fooled me. You didn't say anything about being a 3-bit whore, you know. Seeing as how the conversation was going nowhere, Lydia stomped out but not before leaving her last words. As if anyone even cares what's happening to Lydia Martin. She said in a low voice. And why is that? It's not as if you showed another Lydia Martin other than the borderline slutty bitch queen with a lot of self-importance. Malia retorted, which caused Lydia to pause a bit before continuing walking away. What the hell was that even about? Malia wondered. Looking at Lydia walking away, she couldn't help but think of how stupid the girl really was. Why hide your true self when you are only living your life for yourself? The personified mask Lydia put on every day was even thicker than her mascara. She knew Lydia was smart, but she just couldn't for the life of her figure out why she decided to be like this. Apart from the boys ogling her at every turn and the worship of the student body, she didn't get anything else of worth. Forget it. Some people just decide to be weird for the sake of it. She did not look for Tristan anymore and just found a tree and sat under the shade and pulled out her books for revision. It didn't take long before she felt a pair of hands circling around her waist before lifting her up for a second and sitting her on his lap. I've been looking for you for some time now. Where did you disappear to? She asked without taking her eyes off her book. I was just checking something out. Tristan said and covered his eyes as she rested her head against his chest. Lydia was looking for you. Why? How would I know? Maybe she's lonely since her former boyfriend isn't paying her any attention and now she wants a new hotter one from the lacrosse team. She said in amusement. Tristan kissed her head and she pressed her body into his even more, prompting Tristan to tighten his hold around her waist. Even Allison is acting distant. She's being indoctrinated. She's been hanging out with Gerard for quite some time now. Probably teaching her more about their family. She's getting more confused as the day goes by. Unfortunately, this was where they had no business in interfering. While they've all been dancing around the faint lines and acting oblivious, it now looked like they were going to have that particular conversation in the coming days. You didn't say where you were. Right. McCall and Stilinski kidnapped Jackson and hid him away so that Derek wouldn't get to him. A little hilarious if you ask me, considering what they kidnapped is no different from a ticking time bomb given how he can be easily controlled. Malia snorted with a short laugh, fully agreeing with what Tristan said. Unless they can restrain him very well with strong enough binds, the boy of them might just end up being his next victim. Tristan's nose caught a whiff of a particular tantalizing smell, causing him to look at Malia. Seriously? We're still in school. I blame it on Lydia. She whispered while stealthily drawing one of his hands upwards to cup a full fill of her breasts while using her book to block any curious stare. Well, I don't mind. He said as he grabbed the soft flesh, settling for teasing her a bit to stave off her desires until they got home. Chapter 83, Chapter 80. Tristan, against his character, laughed hard when he heard the results of what McCall and Stilinski had tried doing with Jackson's kidnap, which ironically had ended up with Mr. Whitmore filing a restraining order against them. It was quite the serious affair given that it not only involved the sheriff and McCall's mother, but also Gerard. That's got to be the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Did they not think twice about what would happen after they nabbed him? Apparently they told Jackson's dad through a text that he'll be spending a couple of nights at a friend's place, but somehow messed up the text and that was how he knew. Their little stunt went over 2 days before it was found out, and it was also Jackson who said that it was a poor prank taken too far, otherwise the allegations would have been more serious than just a restraining order. There's no way that the Argents won't move after this with everything that's been happening. Tristan thought. His line of thinking was simple. LaHaye, Erica, McCall, and Stilinski, he assumed, were all under the Argents' watch, regardless of whether they were or weren't. As far as he knew, the Argents were simply bidding time, and it wouldn't be long before they start going after the Kanima and Derek at the same time. As long as Allison didn't make any mentions of them during family bonding time, he was sure that they weren't under suspicion from the Argent Patriarch. And in the off chance that the others really were under Argent supervision, then he'll be able to read their play. It wasn't really a hard thing to do as long as one is smart enough to some degree and add in the bonus of living under a 100-plus-year-old Buddhist alpha, then the pattern was easy to see. They probably want to draw everyone out and then start sniping them at their legs to cut their retreat off, figuratively speaking. Following the fiasco of Jackson's kidnapping, McCall and Stilinski were also temporarily suspended from the team due to the restraining order filed against them. It must be something interesting if you are still amused. Malia rolled over and ended up on top of his body and started stroking his soft hair with her fingers. He kissed her nose before kissing her lips and looked at her with the shadows of a smile resting on his face. The Kanima killed a hunter, at least according to Derek. He said, much to her confusion, not understanding why it was a good thing that he went after a hunter. And that's good how? He snuggled her close, their naked bodies fully melded with the other, and explained. We know that the Kanima is used to carry out vengeance on killers, right? She nodded. Which means that if these people who the Kanima targeted were really killers, then that means that they all share something in common, and that is whoever is controlling the Kanima. Malia blurted out. Exactly, which means that something must have happened sometime in the past that brought all these people together where they must have killed someone, probably someone close to our elusive snake master, which birthed a desire for revenge, one that he is currently carrying out. Tristan expanded. Malia's eyes brightened as she finally understood what Tristan was implying. If they can find out the link between all these people, then they will unravel the identity of whoever was controlling Jackson. But then she remembered that they had no clue on where to start. Knowing what was going through her head, Tristan came up with a solution. We don't have to dig up the pieces of the puzzle ourselves when we can have people do it for us. Scott or Derek? Both. Malia looked at their bedside alarm and noted that they still had half an hour before the bell for the first period. Well, that's good and everything, but I have something more important for you to take care of. You are growing more insatiable by the day, Malia. Tristan snickered as Malia straddled his waist, letting the sheets fall off her body and giving him one of the most breathtaking views his eyes had ever captured. She grinned with a remark of her own. And you are growing more relentless every passing night. She wiggled a bit, feeling the instantaneous reaction she had on him. What can I say? We are a perfect pair. And that's something I fully agree with. She lowered herself till her face hovered just a few centimeters from his. She loved how he never tried restraining himself when it came to her, blatantly showing his dark desires to her. Time seemed to slow down for them as their lips met halfway, marking the beginning of a battle of passion where neither side cared for victory, only focusing on relishing the thrill of their wild tango. As soon as Tristan pulled up to the driveway, he instantly notices the awkwardness of some of the students, particularly a certain duo. Think something happened? His partner in crime asked as she too noticed the weirdness of some students. Probably his words died in his throat as he came across a familiar ginger-haired woman with strict eyes that melted into a kind smile the moment their eyes met. Tristan. Malia. At least that's a familiar face in a sea of teenage students. Victoria Argent, Allison's mother, said. Not just Tristan, but even Malia's brain short-circuited, as they tried understanding why she was here of all places. Not knowing their train of thought and taking their silence as surprise, she spoke on. I took after your former English teacher who was transferred out. Oh. Yes, oh look at the time. I'll see you guys later, I have a class to catch up to. Can't afford to be late on the first day. She said with urgency before hurrying off to her class. Think it's a coincidence? Malia asked as they took out their books from their lockers. Most definitely not. And I think this means only one thing, they have started their hunt. He shrugged and was about to make his way to his shared class with Malia when he heard his name being called through the PA system. Tristan Hayes, please make your way to the guidance counselor's office. That's abrupt. He left Malia and made his way to the guidance counselor's office wondering why he was being called out of nowhere. Knocking on the door, he waited patiently for a few seconds before he was called in. Miss Morrill, he paused and looked at her name plaque before continuing. I was called here out of the blue. Am I in any sort of trouble? He asked the formally dressed black woman sitting behind the desk. She looked quite young, possibly in her late 20s or early 30s, but what drew Tristan's attention to her was the feeling he was getting from her. She was no doubt human, but she somehow feels too human. If such a thing is even possible. Hearing Tristan's question, she gave him a quizzical smile and asked a question instead. Do you believe you are in trouble? No, I do not. He didn't know her reason for asking such a roundabout question, but he gave her his answer. Such a quick and straightforward answer. It's an unfettered truth. He said. She leaned forward, her interest poked by his specific wording. Unfettered truth. That's quite an apt description. Apart from the weirdness of her presence, he generally felt uncomfortable spending more time in the same room with a therapist, such as the woman in front of him. Is there any particular reason why I was called here? He asked again, drawing her attention back to the main matter at hand. She smiled at his effort in changing the subject but nevertheless addressed him professionally. The reason I called you here isn't because of you per se, but because of your friend, Lydia Martin. Friend is quite the close word to use to describe my relationship with her. Tristan said, not knowing what Lydia had to do with him that brought him to the counselor's office. Then what will you call your relationship with her? From what I could gather, you are one of the few people she frequently converse with apart from her circle of friends. She pointed out. I'd rather you use the word friendly to describe us. That aside, what does Lydia's matter have to do with me? Seeing his guard raising up, she shook her head and explained the reason she called him out. I'm afraid that she needs genuine mental support rather than the emotional one she's unconsciously seeking out. Drugs are the last things she needs at this stage. Now Tristan was getting really confused and he made it known to her. And how exactly does that tie to me being here, if you don't mind me asking, Miss Morrill? Doctor-patient confidentiality. I'm not a patient though. He aptly pointed out. Works either way. Due to her current fragile mental state, it's up to me to know the kind of environment she interacts with on a daily basis. And that isn't me. Perhaps she took Jackson's breakup too hard, who knows? He asked. These were his genuine thoughts after Malia had told him how weird the girl was acting. Do you really believe that? Miss Morrill asked with a neutral smile. It's not about what I believe. It's about what happened to her, or rather what's happening to her, and it probably might have started after Jackson broke up with her. The two of them fell silent and a few seconds passed before Miss Morrill reclined comfortably into her chair before speaking once again. I've told her to take a few days off and also called her mother. Thank you for your time, Tristan. I'll be speaking to some of her friends before the end of the day. Hoping I see you later, Tristan. She said as he left his office. What the hell was that last bit about? Chapter 84, Chapter 81. After leaving Miss Morrill's office, Tristan went to class after throwing the episode with the guidance counselor concerning Lydia to the back of his mind. His thoughts were on something else, and that was Jackson. The reptilian flinched for some reason when he saw Tristan walk past him to sit at the back of the class. Concerning the Kanima, he had another way to see if he could find the figurehead behind Jackson's murder spree. He was undoubtedly for Team Kill Jackson, but the predator in him won't feel at rest with him letting the main prey go. Killing the Kanima will force the master back into hiding, and that wasn't what he wanted. If Jackson had been the one doing the killing by himself, then he would have been dead the very next day. As for how he was going to try and sniff out the master, the answer lied with Jackson himself. The reason why he had immediately known that something was wrong with the Kanima the very first time they came across each other was the murderous feeling it gave off that somehow felt foreign even when it came from it. Since Jackson was projecting the feelings of his master, what he needed to do was be in the vicinity of the Kanima and see if he could sense a similar emotion from anyone else around. There are a number of reasons why this might not work, and one of them is if it simply works as a command. Maybe all he needs to do is command Jackson and the Kanima will carry it out without any other input from the master. Another reason is the fact that no one knows if distance has any kind of diminishing effect on their bond. Tristan, however, wasn't so inclined on believing this, as some of the people the Kanima killed required close surveillance, which meant that their location had already been verified before the Kanima swept in for the kill. This means that either the Kanima's master had to be near, or Jackson's master in particular liked being at the scene of the crime. He looked at Jackson, who was focusing on the class, and sensed his emotions and presence to see if he was under any external influence. What he got from Jackson was mostly the feeling of content in general, mild irritation at the subject being taught, and also a particular feeling of smugness he reckoned was being directed at McCall and his best friend. All of a sudden, Jackson was overwhelmed by a sense of alertness, which Tristan noticed and took back his focus on Jackson and acted as if he was listening to what the teacher was saying. His senses are getting sharper. As a cold-blooded creature, his senses are acutely attuned to catching any sort of stalking being done to him. Just like mine. Don't forget to turn in your assignments tomorrow, class. I'll be grading it alongside your exams. The teacher said before leaving the class, before it devolved into chaos as soon as the bell rang. Should I set him off? Tristan thought, but ultimately decided against it. Any ensuing fight was bound to make a lot of noise and damage school properties, not to mention the security cameras being fixed all over the school. I guess I'll just have to wait until he targets someone new. That or confront him after school hours. On the other side of the school, in the principal's office, was Gerard and Victoria sitting opposite each other with a few files and printed sheets scattered on the desk between them. So what do you think? Gerard asked after going through the files of 3 students in particular. Erica Reyes, Isaac Lohay, and possibly Scott McCall are the only ones that seem likely to me. She replied after taking a quick glance at 3 particular files that had their names printed on it. It stands without doubt that the first 2 are Derek's foul-sired, but why the last? Scott McCall? He asked with a knowing smile plastered across his face. He looked too shocked when I walked into his class, as if he already knew who I was. That, and he doesn't know how to properly eavesdrop. She said with the same sweet-hearted smile on her face as she remembered how he subtly flinched when she scratched her nails against the board when she was teaching. Are we going to capture them and use them to draw out Derek Hale? Why do you even think that those two are Derek's betas rather than the alpha who no one has seen since the night Kate died? He cut her off by asking, but faced with her silence he smiled again and gave a simple answer. Call it intuition born out of experience. He then looked over the other files on his desk and continued. As for the betas, we leave them for now and focus on the Kanima killing our men. Besides, my hunch tells me these children know more than they let on, and as for the others. Separated from the files of Scott, Isaac, and Erica were files of a few other students. Though there was no proof to support the fact that they were supernaturals, Gerard would rather be wrong in his assessment of them than just writing them off. Jackson Whitmore, Lydia Martin, Styles Stilinski, Greenberg, Tristan Hayes, and Malia Tate. Quite the interesting group, wouldn't you agree, Victoria? Victoria said nothing other than giving the pictures a cursory glance, her face carrying no emotion. We've already spread out our net. Now the only thing remaining is for the Kanima, its master, Derek, and his betas, and most importantly the vampire, to fight to the death to eliminate each other. The Gu method. Yes, but unlike the ancient Chinese, we are not breeding them to see who comes out the most poisonous. We are simply killing off the final survivor. While Gerard was planning out the most effective way to kill off all the supernaturals involved with his daughter's death, Tristan on the other hand was wondering if he had to attend the rave party Boyd told him about, which apparently everyone was going to. It wasn't a school party, so it stood to reason that high school students would want to attend and let off steam in an unsupervised environment. He had absolutely zero interest in the party since the ones he's been forced to attend since he began schooling were already more than enough for him. So you going or what? Boyd asked as they kept their books inside their lockers. No. Figured so. I might go, so there's that. It's not as if I have anyone to ask out or anything. Boyd said sarcastically. Hey guys. Allison called out to them, looking more better than she was for the last few days. Hey, Allison. Boyd returned her greeting while Tristan nodded at her. Are you going to the rave? Allison thought about it before shaking her head. I don't think so. It's not as if I have anyone to go with. So you'll think about it if someone asks you out to it? Boyd asked, which earned him a scrutinizing look from Allison before she withdrew it and shrugged, saying she'd think about it then. While Allison and Boyd were trying to figure out they actually wanted to go to the rave, Tristan's attention was drawn to the wave of thick jealousy directed at him, which was followed by the silent shutter of a camera. He followed the sound and his gaze met that of a lacrosse player who swiftly turned around naturally as if his attention had not been entirely focused on Allison. Well, she's beautiful. Makes sense she's got some secret admirers. I don't even need to be a genius to know what he's going to do with the picture he took. He thought before ultimately dismissing it. Tristan. What? You were spacing out. I wanted to ask whether you really won't be attending. He shook his head and gave her the same answer he gave Boyd. Even if he ended up attending the party, it would be for an entirely different reason which might involve a lot of blood and maybe a loss of life. Hey, Allison. Did you hear anything from Lydia? He asked curiously as his meeting with the guidance counselor in the morning flashed through his mind. No. I heard she wasn't feeling really good. Maybe I'll text her later. She was the only one who kept a level of communication with Lydia, so she was the perfect person to ask. The reason he was asking was just out of normal courtesy. I still haven't texted Derek about my thoughts on the Kanima and his master and his victims. Hopefully they can figure out something very quickly. He would have either Derek or Scott draw out the Kanima's master while he'll go swiftly for the kill. He had no enmity of any kind with the Kanima or its masters, so he normally should have had no interest in its activities, but unfortunately for the lizard and its shaman, he just didn't like the lizard. It was an instinctual thing, one that was caused by being a fellow cold-blooded creature of the night. Just as how the wolves were residents and worshippers of the moon, the Kanima, and him, a vampire, were lurkers of the night. While he could force himself to look past his baser instincts towards the Kanima and whoever was behind it without doubt were bound to die because of their nature. If the master of the Kanima fully carries out his vengeance, the Kanima will seek a new master to continue the vicious cycle. Chapter 85, Chapter 82. Derek Hale POV. Two people crashed onto the ground with loud groans as they lost for the sixth time against Derek. Stand up. They are not going to stop just because you broke a few bones or are tired. Do we really have to fight against the hunters? Can't we just, sign a peace treaty or something? Isaac's retort was something he couldn't stop from escaping his mouth, and though it had been but a little whisper, Derek's ears caught it crisply. You want me to stop? He asked with a raised brow, the expression on his face, though it didn't show much, sent a shiver down Isaac's spine, causing him to frantically shake his head. Look, it might not be what you had expected when you agreed to receive the bite, but this is your reality now. He wanted them to truly know the dangers the hunters represented, but unfortunately for him, the only way for them to truly understand it was if they were to face the hunters personally, but that wasn't a thought he very much fancied. What of Tristan and Malia? Erica asked, feeling a little disgruntled. They are betas like us, right? They seem to care less about the hunters than you do, even going as far as being best friends with Allison. Why is that? Derek sighed as he felt Erica's indignation that was coupled with the frustration she felt from having her ass handed to her 6 times in a row. They are betas, yes, at least one of them is, but they are different from you. Because they are part of another pack. Derek shook his head at Isaac and thought about how to explain Tristan and Malia's situation in a simple way without diving into the complications. What you have to first understand about either of the both of them is that they are stronger than the both of you combined, and the pack they belong to trusts them enough to let them make decisions they believe is best for them and the pack as a whole. So you don't trust us enough? Erica cut Derek off with a question that seemed more like a statement, which earned her and her CO beta a deadpan glare. They had expected Derek to refute the claim with a clarifying explanation, but his answer stunned them. No, I don't. Despite their training in learning how to control their violent impulses and the glaring fact that Derek was their alpha, his simple answer angered them that they almost growled at him had it not been for the death stare his eyes reflected at them. Derek sighed upon seeing them cower under his gaze and knew he had to explain further to decrease whatever envy they were feeling. You have to know that Tristan is just as strong as me, if not more, and unlike what you might think, just because Allison is their friend doesn't mean they will hesitate to kill her if the situation calls for it. They are currently content with playing the neutral game, but even that won't hold for long. Despite her inner disgruntlement, Erica had no choice but to accept Derek's word at face value. For now. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's continue. That elicited a series of groans, but Derek just laughed and continued his lessons on survival in the wild. POV. Never had I thought that there would come a day when I will finally get my long-due revenge on all those who killed me. While the Halloween freak show of Beacon Hills continues running around without a sense of direction, I will be a step closer to finally finishing my revenge. The next murderer on the list will be at the rave, and I already have everything planned out. Even if they show up and try to stop it, there is nothing they can do against my ultimate weapon. As long as he doesn't show up. Tristan Hayes. Unlike the other werewolves running around the school in human skin, that bastard Hayes is very different. He's not a werewolf, that's for sure. This is annoying. Even thinking about how he almost killed my weapon infuriates me to no end, and not to mention that they hang out together with almost every free chance they get. Derek and his pack are easy to deal with, not that they amount to anything much in the first place. Even Scott is nothing impressive. The hunters, on the other hand, despite being relatively unknown in how they plan to deal with the Kanima, are not much of a threat in my eyes. Not to the extent that he is. I don't think the hunters are aware of his existence. It might be fun to see how he will react when they find out about him. Ha ha ha. That is certainly quite the thought there. What is that Sun Tzu said, know thyself and know thy enemy. History really is the best teacher. Malia Tate POV. Following Tristan's suggestion, we decided to watch the rave since he thought there might be a chance that Jackson goes Jack the Ripper and tears someone apart. It was a valid point, and it looks as if the suggestion he gave to Derek was already something that Scott and Styles had thought about and were looking into it. Since Tristan had wider senses than I do, it was up to him to keep an eye out for any reptilian murderous feeling that comes up during the rave. That, and also see if he can spot out whoever was with Jackson's remote controller. Nothing out of place so far. Unfortunately, it looks like Tristan was right about me drawing flags, and it turns out that I just raised one because by no means was Allison supposed to be here. I texted Tristan of the newest change, and it took only a few seconds for him to reply with a text that made my lips twitch in annoyance. Sometimes his tendency to avoid complicated things and leaving them for me to solve gets on my nerves more than I would like to admit. Then again, I guess I really have nothing to say about it. Things we do for love and all that. I really wanted to ignore her since the reason why she decided to come isn't really important, but then again the question is, why did she come when we all said we wouldn't go? For some reason, I doubt she just thought of it as a last-minute decision. Unless she came because of some hunting for the Kanima under the directive of her family, I can't really think of any other reason. Dropping down from my hiding spot, I stealthily made my way towards Allison just in case someone was keeping an eye on her, which Tristan would have told me about since I am sure he already has his eyes in my direction. Allison. Malia. Gosh, I was getting a little uneasy there. She said with relief. Where's Tristan and Boyd? Her reply definitely did confuse me. Allison, why are you here? Now she was the one looking confused. You sent the text that you were attending last minute. She looked unsure at her own words while I was stunned because of the rubbish she was spouting. What are you talking about? I didn't send any text, nor did Tristan or Boyd. My eyes narrowed and I watched all her movements, but all I could tell was that she was telling the truth, or she believed she was. What? She pulled out her phone and showed me a text that was sent to her phone under the name tag Malia. They even had a short conversation that told her to hurry since we had already arrived. Just then, I heard Tristan's voice as a whisper in my ears. I've lost sight of Jackson. Scratch that. The Kanima is out. Come on, let's go. I dragged her along with a frown on my face. Someone wanted her here and most likely knew we were here as well. I could already fathom a guess who. Let me see that. I took the phone and looked at the contact that sent the text and finally noticed the period at the end of the name which marked it as an entirely different contact. This wasn't from me. I showed her, but unfortunately I can't find any amusement in enjoying the view as her already pale face paled further in the current scenario. But how did someone save a contact on my phone? I can only think of the school. Remember, sometimes we drop our phones in our lockers. Someone might have had access to it during those times. Tristan was thought that whoever was controlling Jackson might be a student or a teacher in the school, but he had nothing substantial to base it on. Then why are you here? And where is Tristan? Seriously, Allison? This is not the time to be a smart-ass. Chapter 86, Chapter 83. Tristan Hayes POV. Well, that's an interesting twist. I thought as I observed Malia dragging Allison away from the rave before turning around to stalk the Kanima. I could feel a smile creeping across my face after I finally caught the scent of the Kanima's master. I would have missed it due to the overwhelming feelings of lust, happiness, and other intoxicating waves of feelings that were in every single corner of the warehouse. Fortunately for me, Jackson's hunger to draw blood acted like a magnet that drew in any similar negative emotion. All I had to do was use the Kanima's lust for blood and backtrace to whoever felt the same way it did in Viola. I could already feel the overbearing blood of an alpha approaching. I have already identified his two betas, but none of them had no idea where Jackson was at. Since I've already gotten the master's scent, one that was surprisingly familiar, I followed after the Kanima, who looked like it already had its eyes on its target for the night, not like I was about to give it the satisfaction of the kill. Nothing angers a predator more than being robbed of a kill. I could already feel the orgasmic feeling of a successful kill emanating from the poor lizard, and even slowed down my momentum for a short second and reacted at the same moment he lunged in for the kill, only for him to miss as I crashed into him from the side, causing him to miss the girl he was about to kill by a hair's breadth. The girl shouted in fright and ran away, but I was no longer paying any attention to her and was facing an incensed screeching Kanima. Missed me, bud. I chuckled humorlessly at the ear-grating hiss that I believe is the lizard tongue equivalent of "you motherfu asterisk cur." Unlike what I expected, he immediately turned tail and ran, literally. I didn't think much about it and blurred after him. I normally pride myself in my agility, but the Kanima, being a supernaturally juiced lizard, was a hell of a lot more agile than me, squeezing his body through tight spaces that I couldn't pass through. This foo asterisk cur actually squeezed himself through a vent before bursting through another section. While I can't actually follow his exact footsteps, I also have ways of traversing complicated terrains. With my claws, I climbed up the walls before jumping over a scaffolding and landed just behind the stunned Kanima. He stopped to hiss and bared his fangs at me, but I just continued my run and closed the distance between us to just a few meters, cutting off his chance of a speedy escape. He seems to know that as well, as he pressed on the attack with a hand swipe, which I stopped easily, only to have his tail whip across my stomach, making me stumble a step back. Satomi was right. This bastard's growing stronger. A tail wrapped my fingers and tried to draw me in, but I didn't budge, and when he tried retracting his appendage, he found it stuck in a cocoon of blood. The blood quickly gained cracks as it wasn't strong enough, but I could care less about that as I used my free hand to introduce 4 deep slashes on its tail, causing him to shriek in pain. He lunged at me and tried to cut me with his poisoned claws, but I caught his hand and broke it and drove my fangs into his neck, drawing blood and pushing in my own venom before jumping away as he tried to slash me. Very repugnant. I grimaced at the taste of his blood that had a gamey texture, very murky and throat irritating. Thought so. From the looks of it, my poison had little to zero effect on him, which was probably due to his poisonous nature. It did wobble a bit, but the effects were ignorable. He ran towards me with renewed anger and I met him halfway with blood-encased fingers. He dodged my first 2 strikes and rolled over me and tried attacking from behind, but I dodged it and drove a knee to his head. Taking advantage of his stunned state, I slashed at his knees to bring it down and then dug my claws into his reptilian slit eyes. He suddenly became rabid and started attacking blindly. Unfortunately for him, to regrow his eyes will take focus and I wasn't about to give him that. Grabbing one of his flailing arms, I swung him around and drove him into the ground and swiftly dislocated his shoulders, earning me another shrill shriek. His tail tried a last-ditch desperate attack, but that only served to add to his miseries as I swiftly caught it and severed it at its roots. His mind is currently divided between deciding which of its body parts to heal, which made him unable to react properly as I broke his wrists. Holding him up by his neck, I looked at him and went through my options of whether or not to kill him. Coming to a decision wasn't hard once I remembered that the Kanima will always find a new master to bind to or just go around killing murderers. He was already slowly changing back to his human form, but I didn't care about that and slashed 5 deep lines across his throat. For a more thorough death, the blood around my hands congealed and formed a blade around my 5 fingers joined together and drove it into his heart. No hard feelings. I had nothing else to say to him as I flung away his body to the side. Enjoyed the show? I turned to my spectator and asked, but he said nothing and just looked at Jackson to confirm whether he was really dead. I decided to stick around to see if you might need some help, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Derek said with a soft smirk with an accompanying shrug before turning around. Figured out who was controlling him? I think Styles found something. Don't worry. I already have him in my sights. I said and looked at my hand with a frown on my face as I remembered the sucking sensation I felt when I crushed his heart. It felt as if the blood inside it was sucked into my body through the wounds in my hands. Are you going after him right now? He asked. I didn't answer that question, but I could tell that he was smirking as he left. I'm not taking care of the body, you know. I'll have my betas take care of it. POV change. Tristan nodded and then left while thinking of how to solve the problem that crept up out of nowhere. Allison's visit was spontaneous and it made no *king sense, but he could worry about that later after dealing with the getaway. Hopefully Malia takes care of it. He thought as he pursued the car that was speeding away. Mr. Harris's car. But the person driving doesn't smell like Mr. Harris. He didn't think much of it and just followed behind the car without being seen. He could already tell that whoever was driving was panicking and even cursing out in frustration. Since Malia hadn't made any sort of call, he could focus on the prey in front of him without worry. And besides, he trusted Malia's ability enough to escape the hunters if any showed up. He saw the car park at a house and the person driving finally came down and Tristan immediately identified him. Matt Daler. A fellow lacrosse player and also the guy he caught taking pictures of Allison. He was a normal teenager, all things considered. Never involved in any rumors as far as he was aware, never hung out with girls, had a few friends and was a good student academically. It's always the quiet ones, huh? I wonder what that says about me. He sneakily entered Matt's house through the open room window and waited a few seconds before the door opened to reveal a shocked then frightened Matt. He tried to bolt out of the door, but Tristan yanked him by his neck and pulled him back effortlessly. Stop. Please, it's not what you think. He pleaded as he felt Tristan's claws tighten around his neck. Why did you kill those people? Was Tristan's simple curious question. Will you let me go if I tell you? His words abruptly died down as he felt a claw puncture into his skin and draw blood, sending a chilling shiver down his spine. It didn't take long before he started spewing out why he used Jackson to carry out a series of killings. Turns out that he almost drowned in a celebration party for the swim team a few years back when Isaac's father was the swim team coach. Despite his shouts that he couldn't swim, no one listened and threw him into the pool where he drowned and passed out before he was rescued. Isaac's father then warned him not to say anything about the incident, not caring of the fact that he almost died and developed a severe trauma from the experience that he'd most times feel himself drowning, most times if he closed his eyes for too long or fell asleep. After seeing Mr. LaHaye a few weeks back, his anger resurged, and that was when he formed a connection with the Kanima and started using it to kill all those that were involved in his first death. I honestly feel sorry for you, Tristan said with sympathy, which made Matt's hope rise, only for it to drop with his next sentences. But I don't care about your reasons. Before Matt could utter another word, Tristan snapped his neck and flung him to his bed. He wasn't about to be a moral judge unless this wouldn't go anywhere. Matt's actions were the reason why he targeted him. And besides, the boy was a little sick in the head just with the posters and cut-out pictures of Allison plastered everywhere across the room. There was even a crime board where he detailed Allison's schedule amongst other things. Having admirers really must be a pain in the ass, he said as he left through the window before disappearing into the darkness of the night. Chapter 87, Chapter 84. POV, with Malia and Allison. Malia dragged Allison through the crowd of wiggling and sashaying bodies that humped and bumped to the loud music that the DJ delivered. Allison had a frown all over her face as Malia tried leading her out of the party. Stop! She couldn't take it anymore and shouted before pulling her wrist out of Malia's hands. What were you doing here in the first place, and where is Tristan? Listen, Allison, calm down. We'll talk about that when we get out of here, she said and tried pulling Allison, but the girl wasn't hearing it, proving stubborn as she refused to move an inch from where she stood. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the foo *k is going on, Allison said with tears already brimming in her eyes. Although she was a strong girl on most occasions, but what has been happening lately, especially tonight, unnerved her to the point that she had started breaking down after seeing how even her best friend was keeping things from her. Really? You want to do this now? Malia was stupefied as she saw the defiant look in Allison's eyes. Just tell me. What the hell is going on? What are you not telling me? She asked amidst chokes. Malia had no idea on how to answer that particular question. Her mouth was open but no words came out. Just as she was about to say something, anything, a few screams erupted inside the party and the sound of a gun firing was heard. Not just Malia, but Allison's face paled as they heard the gunshot that was followed by a very loud and clear roar. By now, the warehouse had dissolved into pandemonium as everybody started running outside. By the roar alone, Malia could tell that it was Derek's pack in a confrontation with the hunters. Taking the chance, Malia grabbed Allison and they both broke into a run as they scrambled to leave the building to avoid anyone seeing them. What's happening? Allison screamed as she heard another roar that almost made her fall had Malia not held her up. By instinct, she knew what it was. An alpha. She shivered as the thought of being in close vicinity with such a monster pervaded her thought. Thankfully for her, she couldn't focus on it as Malia ran into a corner since she knew that the hunters would probably be at the front and she didn't want to draw any amount of suspicion from them, especially with Allison with her. Allison on the other hand was glad that Malia didn't follow the front door because she had told her parents that she wasn't going to attend the rave, only for that fraud text to take her out of the house in haste. They finally left the building and were about to escape, but something happened that stunned not just Allison, but Malia too. While Allison escaped the warehouse unimpeded, Malia fell backwards as if she just crashed against some invisible wall. She got up and stretched her hand, but no matter the amount of force she used, she couldn't pass the bluish field that suddenly came to life once her hand reached a certain distance. Oh shit! Mountain ash! They both said at the same time, making the two of them look at the other in the eye. Malia. Allison was unsure on how she was supposed to feel and react to something she had suspected for a while now. All the repressed conflicted feelings she's been having since Kate died all bubbled forth as she stared at Malia. Anger, betrayal, envy, hatred, frustration, fear, sadness, grief, and finally pleading. Malia, seriously? When you need a guy. Malia sighed as she cursed Tristan for making her live through this alone. She was no good with emotions, damn it. I guess the jig is finally up, hey. She said in a light-hearted tone that betrayed the gut-wrenching emotion that was tearing up her insides. She contemplated on what to do, whether to call out to Tristan or to try and hide, hoping someone scatters the circle of mountain ash around the building. Allison claimed herself down like she was taught and asked Malia with a cold voice. Is that all you have to say? Malia was not in the least bit intimidated by Allison's cold voice and helplessly held her hands up. What do you want me to say, Allison? I'm just as shocked as you by this, trust me. Seeing how carefree Malia appeared, Allison was further incensed and raised her voice in a shout. Why? Why? It was such a simple question, but for Allison it asked a lot. Why did she lie? Why did she insist on being her friend? Why did she comfort her after Kate died? Why didn't she tell her? Why did they care for her? It was an endless series of whys that she had no idea which one she meant to ask, so the only thing that came out was why. Why? Why what? Malia asked. You are going to be a lot more specific than that, princess. Why me? Did both of you truly cared? Why did you remain my friend even after finding out who I was? Was it to spy on me and my family? She could no longer keep her calm facade and burst out crying as she asked the questions she had been afraid to ask. Malia looked at her best friend, knowing fully well that their relationship will be drastically different than whatever it used to be after this night. Even if she wasn't good with expressing her emotions, faced with Allison's emotionally sincere questions, there was little she could do except answering her. We had no idea, Tristan and I, that you were an Argent when we first met. When we later found out, Tristan had suggested that we cut all ties with you, but I told him not to. You are our first friend, and Tristan agreed with me because we wanted to see how far our relationship with you would go before you found out and drew your bows at us. And what would have happened after that? Malia pointed to the demarcation line of mountain ash that divided the both of them. Then we become enemies, standing on two different sides just like now. Malia said softly and then added as if she knew the next question Allison would ask. When you finally turn your wolf's bane-tipped arrows at us will be the same time we bare our fangs at you and aim to take your life. She faced Allison's sincerity with hers, not putting any layer of filter on her words. Allison trembled as she heard her best friend casually talking about killing her should they fight against each other. Not caring for her inner turmoil, Malia continued. I'm a war coyote and you're a hunter. We are enemies by nature, so you don't have to feel conflicted. The choice is yours to make. Tears freely fell down Allison's cheeks due to the pain she felt in her heart as she saw Malia's cold and shining blue eyes complemented with vicious fangs that grew from their normal size. Why? Why would you say that, Malia? Do I really mean nothing to the both of you? In your eyes, am I just a naive human girl you keep around to experience human relationships? Am I some kind of pet project for you? Answer me, Malia! Her eyes bled crystal tears as she looked at Malia, who stood in front of her indifferently and said words she couldn't understand. Seeing Malia staying silent, the rage and betrayal she was feeling eclipsed everything else she was feeling, and she acted without thinking. In a single step, she crossed the mountain ash and stood in front of Malia and asked in between chokes and a tear-marred face. Was I ever your friend, Malia? If not, then kill me now so that you can be done with it. You wouldn't have to deal with stupid annoying Allison anymore, right? Isn't that what you want? Then do it. Slit open my throat with your claws and kill the enemy! Malia felt, shattered upon seeing how broken Allison was, and the feeling in her stomach increased that she felt the need to throw up. Or do you want me to attack you first? Is that it? Do you need a reason to fight back? Then take this as your reason. She said and took out a kunai from her back waistline. Her hands trembled even more as she saw Malia still staring at her with those beautiful blue eyes of hers, but she couldn't stop here. She couldn't fully trust her own family, and the people she took like her own family, who she thought she could rely on, turned out to be people she no longer had any idea of who they really are or how they felt about her. Closing her eyes, her teeth clattered against each other as she threw everything to the wind and plunged the kunai forward. She felt a jerk and her heart chilled as she thought that she actually had stabbed Malia only for a pair of strong arms wrapped around her with bone-breaking force. Oh, she's going to squeeze to death, isn't she? She trembled at that stray thought. She stood still, not even daring to take a breath as fear gripped every nerve in her body, but after waiting for a few seconds, the crushing pain she was expecting never came. Instead, she felt slight tremblings and heard some incomprehensible mumblings. She's the one shaking. Is she? She felt scared at the thought, but she was willing to grab onto any spark of hope, so she opened her eyes and holding her comfortably tight while sobbing was. Malia. Shut up. Malia's croaked voice sounded out, but instead of scaring her, it delivered a sense of warmth around her that reopened the floodgates of tears. Of course I love you, stupid. You are my best friend and I couldn't give enough shits about you being an Argent. To me you are Allison, the naive bipolar pale princess. I'm sorry, okay. Thankfully they were in a secluded place so no one took notice of them when everything was happening. They both stood there, even as rain started falling, sobbing softly as the final barrier between them was torn down. They stayed like that for a few minutes without any indication of separating any time soon, that is until a certain someone disturbed their peaceful moment. Are you guys going to be done with that any moment soon? Tristan couldn't help himself after watching them for a few minutes. Chapter 88, Chapter 85. Never in his short life did he ever think that he'd be able to witness the scene he arrived at when he returned back to check on Malia. He had sensed both Allison and Malia's extreme emotional turmoil that forced him to rush over. The ups and downs of their emotional wavelength didn't make it any easier for him, causing him to hurry up and worry, and when he finally arrived, the receptacle he was met was stunning to say the least. While he wanted nothing more than to ask what the hell was happening, none of them had the time. He could already feel Derek raging, which told him of the likely scenario that one of his beta had been caught. I hate to break this up, but we have to get rid of the mountain ash. He felt the way Allison shivered as a wave of fright washed over her, but she forcefully repressed it. That alone was enough to prove his thoughts true. Why didn't it scatter with all the people running around? She asked, pointing at the long line of ash. It's not as simple as it seems. You can say it works on faith or intent. Thankfully she easily shattered it, but at that moment, there were already a few people, hunters, converging on our location. Tristan. We'll talk later. I cut her off and turned to Malia, who nodded at my silent question. I'm tired of running away every *king time we come across them, you know. No more pretenses. I asked while giving a look at Allison. The girl still seemed out of it, but thankfully she was holding herself well, at least until the adrenaline wore off and she can finally think with a calm head. It's not as if we have much of a choice at this point. Malia shrugged. We had a choice in escaping the hunters and no longer involving ourselves since the Kanima and its master are dead. Your choice. I replied with a shrug of my own. We're probably making the wrong choice, but I don't necessarily think it's that bad. For the record, this is the third time I'm bailing Derek out. I said before leaving the both of them there to clash against the hunters. I can feel my blood churning. I really am a cold-blooded vampire through and through to feel some excitement in this. It's not as if the hunters were going to leave us be if we are caught. They were out for blood, so I guess it's all right. It's not as if it's a foregone conclusion that they must find out about us. Unhinging and satiating mine and Malia's taste every once in a while is not such a bad thing after all. I quickly crossed paths with the two incoming hunters, and before they could even register my presence, I sank my fangs in an unprotected neck and drank a mouthful of slightly tasty blood and ripped out his throat before moving to the next one. The other one tried triggering an alarm of sorts, but his hand fell limp as I slashed through the joint muscle fibers, permanently paralyzing that arm. Not that he was going to be having any use for it again, as his neck twisted a full turn. My ears picked up an irritating silent frequency, one that no doubt will be doubly irritating for war creatures and scramble their senses. Fortunately for me, my hearing worked more like echolocation than advanced hearing, so it was easy for me to pinpoint the direction it was propagating from. With bloody red claws, I ran up the walls and took huge leaps with supernatural agility and silently perched on the ceiling directly above the hunter, who was holding some type of emitter. His death was fluid with a quick drink and a broken spine. Allison's heart beat against her chest with a heavily reverberating thrum as she followed behind the trail of carnage Malia and Tristan left in their wake. She didn't know she was making the right choice, but her feet never stopped moving as she followed the trail of blood like some bloody map. Stop. No. Don't see, come close. Please. She quickened her pace as she heard the screams and finally came across the scene of Malia ripping apart grown men with guns without much effort. She watched as Malia's claws sliced through the barrel of a gun pointed at her and slashed her claws across the face of the stunned man, taking both his eyes, nose, and lips. She used the screaming, blood-gurgling man as a shield from the next barrage of bullets and tossed him away after getting an opening that she swiftly took and resumed her gory art. Allison's stomach churned and her eyes burned as she saw everything being laid bare in front of her eyes, the ugly confrontation between hunters and werewolves, or were coyote in Malia's case. Her thoughts were cut short by another series of groans and shouts as Malia engaged the hunters barring her path. Allie, son. Her breath hitched as she saw one of the hunters, one she was a little familiar with, call out to her as he laid in a pool of his own blood. His hands were clenched around a gun that he tried handing out to her before his eyes lost their glow and his body stilled. He died. Just like that. Everything was blurry for Allison and felt unreal, like a dream that she couldn't even produce a normal reaction. She just followed through absent-mindedly and grabbed the bloodied gun and pushed herself off the ground and trudged herself along. Gerard Argent POV. The old veteran hunter looked at the warehouse-turned-death house with a walkie-talkie in his hand that he used to give out real-time orders and listen to how the mission was progressing. What is the status on the Alpha? Falco and his team have managed to apprehend Derek's beta, Isaac LaHaye. The Alpha is resisting and has killed a number of the hunters that came across him. Gerard didn't show any reaction to the news of his men dying and was about to relay a new set of directives when his walkie-talkie picked up an open transmission filled with screams and cries for help. What was that? Does anybody copy? What is your visual? Please. Don't kill. Gerard grimaced as the transmission was cut off before he could get anything solid on what was happening inside. Does anyone have a visual of Derek and his betas? He asked. Yes, sir. A team is stopping Derek and his female beta from getting to Isaac LaHaye. Cutting off the transmission there, Gerard turned to his son who was standing beside him from the beginning and said while sporting a weary smile. "It looks like we are going in. Do we know what is killing our men?" Chris asked with furrowed brows. Gerard snorted and grabbed a gun from the car's trunk before turning to his son. "I doubt it's the Kanima, or else they would have reported it on first sight." He drawled out and left the rest for Chris to figure out, which he did the very next second. "The vampire? Possibly." Chris drew his Desert Eagle, which earned him a chuckle from his father, but he didn't humor the older man with a reaction other than waiting for him to lead the way. "Let's see if we can catch a nightcrawler tonight." The two of them metered the building with practiced steps and their eyes drunken and analyzed every single thing it captured. What the hell happened here? Chris crouched down and took a better look at the state of an obviously blood-deficient man. "See those punctures on the carotid artery? The suction force that acts on them as it draws blood is enough to shatter any joint in the body. That's how fast they suck in blood. Let's go." Gerard only spared a cursory glance at the pale corpse before he continued moving on, coming across mangled corpses in different states. "Quite a vicious monstrosity." Chris nodded at his evaluation. "I can see why they were hunted down to near extinction." "Shhh." Gerard shushed him and closed his eyes for a few seconds before asking Chris. "Feel that light tremor?" Truly, when he blocked out every sound, he could feel slight tremors in the ground he was standing on. "We're near, let's go." Gerard took out something from his pockets, bullets, and slotted them inside his gun before taking out a few pills and munched on them as they moved on. They followed the slight tremors until it became louder and louder until they were right in front of something Chris would have sworn would have given him nightmares for months had it not been for his experience as a veteran hunter. The vampire moved like a blur with a blood mist covering his face and obscuring his appearance. They watched as he danced around the steadily dwindling hunters, wrapping blood like tendrils around some of them and even using it to dismember some of them. "No!" Gerard gasped with wide eyes and a feeling of dread rattling his bones. Chapter 89, Chapter 86. Gerard stood rooted to his spot as his mind struggled to comprehend what he was currently seeing. "No!" His shock-filled whisper was caught by Chris, who looked at his father stunned, never expecting to see such an outlandish expression on his face. "What is it? Is there something weird about the vampire?" Even without anyone telling him, Chris could tell that something like the creature in front of him was not something that was supposed to exist. Just based on what he had seen for a couple of seconds was more than enough to classify him as something more dangerous than any beta he has faced. Even more than an alpha. That thing is not supposed to exist. We have to kill it now. Gerard didn't care anymore, his once calm composure having completely shattered in a few seconds, raised his gun and took a seasoned aim at the blood monster in front of him and pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! 2 shots in quick succession resounded, but he grimaced as he saw the vampire effortlessly dodge them. Seeing Gerard opening suppression fire, Chris forgot all his curiosities and opened fire at the vampire, who was jumping around, still trying to kill the hunters around him despite the assault. Everything was quickly progressing that Chris was having a hard time keeping an analytical outlook on it all, and it turned for the worse when 5 crimson tails seemingly made out of blood appeared behind him and increased his mobility by folds. They managed to take a few shots at him, but other than slowing him down for a few seconds, it did not seem like normal wolfsbane-laced bullet had any notable effect on him. "Die, you vermin!" Gerard growled and pulled out a small canister from his pockets and threw it in the direction of the vampire while also shooting at it. Due to the overwhelming amount of suppression fire, they were succeeding in pushing him back, giving the once restrained hunters the breathing space to join them in riddling the creeping leech with bullet holes. The canister Gerard threw exploded with a green mist in the vampire's direction and elicited the first violent reaction they had ever seen him express. The bloody tail-like appendages behind him seemed to lose their cohesiveness and started melting off in smoke, while the vampire himself fled from the vicinity of the green mist like a cat that had its tail stepped on. "He's burning up!" Chris exclaimed as he saw the vampire's skin emitting smoke as the skin started burning and melting off. Gerard let out a derisive laugh as he heard the suppressed cry of pain from the vampire. He was sure the conceited bloodsucker had never felt this kind of pain in his life before, making him act unbridled in the presence of hunters. "What was that?" Chris asked while clicking his tongue as the vampire hid itself from their line of fire. "Mistletoe. A very rare type of mistletoe that works against vampires just like wolfsbane to werewolves," Gerard said with a laugh and gave his men a hand signal. They all slowly started approaching where the vampire was hiding. "Come out, leech, so I can stick you up on a pike," Gerard taunted as they all slowly moved forward. Tristan Hayes POV. Tristan groaned as he held his hand in pain in hopes of assuaging the burning feeling that was currently eating away at it. He had been keeping an eye on Gerard and Chris ever since they arrived, but he decided against retreating due to the blood high he was on and also the fact that he wanted to see what they had that was effective against him. Well, the second reason was something he decided on after Gerard and Chris opened fire on him. I need blood. His blue eyes gleamed in an eerie cold light and he unconsciously ran his tongue across his lips and savored the splatter of blood across it, fueling his hunger even more. He could tell their location as they tried surrounding him, but he wasn't worried about that as he kept most of his attention on Gerard and Chris to prevent himself from falling for another surprise trick. He turned his head towards a certain direction where he could feel someone watching before turning back to focus on the converging net around him. Who knew mistletoe was my kryptonite? He muttered. He could finally breathe evenly as the burning had subsided by a great deal, but his sporadic healing was stunted, no doubt an effect of whatever breed of mistletoe Gerard had used on him. He circulated the blood mist covering his face and drew in the excess blood from his tails back to his body while leaving only a single tail behind. Just a little bit closer. A whip of solidified blood shot towards Gerard, which forced the old man to dodge out of the way, giving Tristan the opening he needed. Firing off 5 needle-lime blood pins to frighten a few of the hunters, Tristan jumped back into the fray and marked his first prey despite taking a few bullets to his body. His tail shot forth like a snake and pierced the man in his chest, killing him. The hair of everyone watching the spectacle stood on its end when the tail inflated and as it sucked out the blood from the man and transferred it back to Tristan, healing him and replenishing his energy. Tristan didn't care about their shock, and it was only when his second prey fell before they were roused back and reminded of the danger that they were faced with. Tristan grimaced in pain as 2 bullets entered into his back, but that didn't stop him from driving his hand deep into someone's heart and ripping it out. His tail whipped out in reflex as his senses picked up Gerard trying to shoot him with a suspiciously short gun and sliced through his gun and into his chest, but he was saved as most of the injury was mitigated by the bulletproof he wore underneath. I guess this is my cue to leave, he said as he felt someone far behind pointing a gun at him with trembling hands after he attacked Gerard and turned to Chris. This night had already proved more useful than he had expected, with the way his blood control drastically improved the more he killed and drank blood. He brought out 5 more tails to make it 6 and used them to lift himself up to the ceiling and climbed through it like a spider before pulling it back in as he made his way across. Watching Tristan leave, her legs finally gave out and she crashed into the ground with her whole body covered in sweat as if she just came out of the shower. What she had seen on this night completely overturned everything she had once thought about the supernaturals. From confronting Malia to watching her best friend kill people in cold blood, people under her family, she was left unsure of how to feel about it. She had always looked up to Malia as this strong girl that made sure her voice was heard anytime she had something to say, but the Malia she saw tonight felt like an entirely different person from the girl she had once known. Did I ever truly know them? She let out a scornful laugh as she thought about it. And Tristan? To be honest, she had no idea on how she was supposed to feel, or how she wanted to feel, when it came to Tristan. If Malia could be described as a very violent beast, Tristan was in every right a monster. The way he killed the hunters he came across almost made her scream in nightmarish fright and run away and pray that everything she saw him do was a very bad nightmare. Hearts, heads, limbs, intestines and even someone's spine were all part of the artistic carnage he painted. And then he started controlling his blood. Seeing him do that clued her in on what he was. A vampire. One more monstrous than whatever was depicted in all the supernatural books and movies she's watched about vampires. To be honest, she was dreading what would happen on Monday when they met back at school. How will their talk go? Will the courage she had when she faced Malia be present after she's seen them at their worst, know their true selves? Whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. I will ask them all I can come Monday, and our continued friendship will depend on how I feel about this tomorrow. She thought and picked herself up off the floor, careful not to attract her father's attention, and sneaked back to her house and immediately slumped on her bed, passing out as all the emotional drain and adrenaline took its toll on her as soon as she sat on the bed. No one knew what her last thoughts were, but one thing that was an assured fact was that the next time she meets Tristan and Malia will be a huge turning point for her life in entirely different ways. Chapter 90, Chapter 87. Tristan and Malia entered their house with heavy expressions on both their faces. The night was full of surprises, one after the other, that had them thoroughly spent, emotionally and physically. Seeing how absent-minded Malia was, Tristan sighed as carried her to the bathroom, where he then proceeded to slowly wash both of their bodies. He took his time in cleaning the dried-up blood and little bits of flesh stuck in their fingers and hair. Throughout the bath none of them said anything except for Tristan humming a soft tone as he rinsed their bodies under the shower. He took her to bed and tucked her in before climbing in and cuddling her, holding her tightly against his chest as he ran his finger through her slightly wet hair. She finally found out, Trist. She blurted out, but Tristan just hummed, saying he understood. She cares for us, you know. She added. Though he had seen a part of it, her emotions were bouncing up and down the spectrum for him to gain a good reading on them, so he paid extra attention to Malia's words. She's my best friend, Trist. The first friend I've ever made. As she said that, I could feel the soft smile that was currently adorning her face. You said it yourself. She cares about us. Going as far as wanting for us to still be friends even after she found out about us. Why are you still worried? I asked, knowing fully well what was currently plaguing her mind. Despite all that was said, she saw us as our true selves, killing and ripping apart people like it's nothing. So the problem comes from the fact that she would finally come to her senses and no longer want anything to do with you out of fear or / disgust. She didn't say anything, nor did she need to, as I completely understand what she's currently feeling. Since there's nothing we can do about it from our end, how about we forget it for now and try to think about it tomorrow? She sighed and snuggled deeper into my embrace, both of us closing our eyes and letting the night run its natural course. While the vampire and coyote went to sleep, Gerard sat in his study with Chris and Victoria, all of them wearing pensive looks on their faces. Chris had filled Victoria in on what had happened, so she had a little bit of understanding about the nature of the newest threat they were going up against. As expected, Victoria was flabbergasted when Chris described the vampire's abilities, and according to Gerard, that wasn't all the vampire could do. I remember you telling me about the different variants of the vampire species, and you seem to recognize something about the one we faced for you to be surprised to such an extent. Chris opened up the conversation with the first thing on his curious list about the vampire. Gerard sighed wearily and gulped down the drink in his glass and refilled it to drown down its entire content before he cleared his throat. Unlike other species, the vampire species are divided through a very large spectrum that some of these variant species are now classified as their own racial species. He started, gaining the rapt attention of the two other people with him in his study. Dragors, Wendigos, ghouls, streetboys, even zombies, they are all considered offshoots of the vampiric species. According to the lore, all these variant races came forth when the children of the original vampire started copulating with different races. Other than that, there are also some variant vampires that are known by the name of their abilities, for example the Shadow Walkers. Apart from the basic vampire attributes, the Shadow Walkers are known for their ability to walk through shadows, disappearing from one point and appearing at another. He paused there to let them digest what he's said so far, and judging from their shocked expressions, this was the first time they were hearing something like this. To be able to move between shadows? It was such a frightening ability that they had no idea how they wanted to go about with countering it. Even among vampires, the difference between two variants is a very wide one. There are actually some vampires who can't walk around in the day as they'd burst into flames, but there are some that have a very high resistance to the sun. There is a reason why they are considered the rulers of the night compared to other night walkers. And I'm guessing whatever variant that vampire is not anything that sounds pleasing to the ears, right? Chris asked rhetorically, already seeing the trend with Gerard's explanations. Is there something special about vampires that control blood? Victoria asked. Gerard grimaced a little but nevertheless answered them. Bloodborns, that is what they are called. Already knowing the next question after that, he continued. Bloodborns are considered special, almost a myth even, in vampire communities. Faster growth rate compared to other vampires, high resistance to the sun and any ailments, blood control amongst many things. Due to nobody having any concrete data on vampires, some of their abilities are unknown, but the reason why bloodborns are considered special even among other vampires is that they are believed to have a way to steal the strength of their fallen prey through the blood. The blood is considered the key to life in most texts, so there might be some truth to it. Who knows? This. If they were flabbergasted before, hearing Gerard's words downright frightened them. Has any of this been proven true in Argent history? Victoria asked, not feeling exactly happy with what she's just learned. As long as they have a weakness, we'll be able to gut them just like those stupid mutts. No. He shook his head but added a layer of advice. Just because no one has proven the claims true doesn't mean they are not. Every rumor bears a resemblance to the origin story. The two of them nodded at Gerard's advice, veiled warning, but somewhere at the back of their mind they thought that Gerard's last bit about the Bloodborns might be a lie. No, they hoped it was a lie. Unfortunately, mistletoe is the only thing we know that can affect them. Fortunately, the applications of mistletoe are quite extensive as long as one is creative enough. The night had been a bust for the Argents, and it was something that pissed off Chris to a whole new level. Ever since they relocated back to Beacon Hills, they've been running around in circles with anything of substance to show for it. First was the Alpha and his vendetta killings. Not only did they not catch any of the betas or Derek somehow managed to kill the Alpha in the midst of all that chaos, and the only thing that they had to show for it were body bags of their own men and a tombstone for Kate. Then came the Kanima that they haven't been able to catch. Even Derek's beta that they managed to catch was lost either due to the interference of the vampire or someone else helped them out. It was frankly depressing every time he thought about it that he sometimes wonders if he made the right choice of starting Allison's training earlier than he had intended. The weekend passed, and with its passage came life-changing decisions and experiences for some people, while for others it was the very same repetitive weekend they've known since forever. Unfortunately, the news that the co-captain of the lacrosse team, Jackson Whitmore, was found dead due to an in the rave he attended during the weekend. The atmosphere of Beacon Hills High was very somber as the death of such a prominent student touched the entire student body in different ways. For people like Scott and Stiles, Jackson's death were like a cruel joke that turned out to be true. Not once in their life did they think Jackson would just die like that. For Lydia, who was his ex-girlfriend, the rumors going around was that she went catatonic upon receiving the news. Evidently his death disturbed her greatly that she was admitted to the hospital, where doctors said she's had a series of panic attacks and any more would be dangerous for her mental health. Even Coach couldn't find it in himself to joke around like he usually does, as he walked with a very solemn face. Even Allison was confused and affected when she heard of Jackson's death, because he was someone she knew and he also happened to die in the rave where everything happened. It added to her resolve to get as many answers as possible as she could from Tristan and Malia. As for Tristan and Malia, the former, who was the one responsible for Jackson's death, the dreary atmosphere of the school didn't affect them one bit as they awkwardly went through their class, which all of them shared, and waited patiently for the bell to ring so they could get the true shocking confrontation out of the way as soon as possible. And that was how the three of them found themselves facing each other in the cafeteria as soon as the bell rang. Chapter 91, Chapter 88. The three of them sat around a table in the cafeteria and silently looked at each other, waiting for the other to break the tense and awkward atmosphere that surrounded them. At the end of it all, it was Malia who finally took it upon herself to break the ice. "So, no one wants to say anything, or are we just going to continue looking at each other's faces?" Allison held a scoff and looked between the two of them and stilled her heart. "Who are you? No, what are you?" The question was mostly meant for Tristan, and though she had an inkling as to what he was, she held back and waited for him to admit it. "Well, you already know Malia is a work coyote, so the question is mostly meant for me. The answer to that is vampire. That is what I am." Her heartbeat spiked up for an instant as he said that, but her facial expression remained calm, betraying nothing of what she felt inside. Unfortunately for her, it had no effect on the two people in front of her. "So you, suck blood from people?" Her voice strained as that question left her lips, but Tristan didn't notice, or he didn't show it if he did. "Not counting yesterday's night, all my drinks come from Malia." "Have I killed before?" "Plenty." "What of the people you killed? Don't you care about the innocent lives you've taken?" She almost shouted, but remembering that they were in the cafeteria, she kept her voice down. Even with her hushed outburst, neither Malia nor Tristan showed any hint of remorse as Malia spoke. "Apart from the single incident that turned our eyes blue, the rest of the people we've killed are all Argents. So no, we don't care about the lives we've taken from them." Allison's next statement hitched in her throat as she was once again reminded that they were living in two different worlds. The values she was being trained with in respect to being an Argent hunter was the exact opposite of what they were. It's... She let out a despondent sigh. All the questions she had wanted to ask suddenly fizzled away from her mind as soon as she confronted them about it. They were what she was taught to kill on sight. Now she was stuck between her own thoughts and her sense of duty. What are even my thoughts on this? Everything about this was confusing because nobody bothered training her in the event that such a scenario comes into play. "So what now?" she asked with a weary smile. Malia looked at Tristan and they both shrugged before turning to Allison, who actually chuckled upon seeing how in sync they were, exactly as they've always been. "Honestly, at this point it's up to you," Tristan said. Allison definitely didn't believe that, and she made it known with the skeptic face she gave him. "So if I decided to tell my dad about you guys? Your dad will come after us and we will be forced to defend ourselves, which will ultimately end with either or both of your parents dead. Obviously, plagued with grief over losing your parents, you will then come after us, and while Malia might hesitate, I will not in killing you. Tristan narrated as if reading from a script. And like any twisted berate friend ex-enemy story, it will end with your family being dead, Malia in depression while I'm forced to pick myself back up to look after her. Allison looked at Tristan with color drained from her face, looking on in shock as if Tristan just grew another head as he perfectly narrated the thoughts that had been plaguing her since 2 days ago, but the way he phrased his made it a little different from her own dark thoughts. What makes you so sure that you'll be alive by then? The thought itself was morbid from her point of view, and coupled with the fact that she was currently sharing a table with 2 people her family has killed and hunted down from centuries. Tristan just shrugged and replied. That is based on what is currently going through my head. In such an event, factoring your own death sounds stupid. He then paused and saw how Allison's emotions were all over the place and she was this close to having a panic attack. Did my words really unnerve her to such an extent? He thought as he clarified further so as not to give her the wrong impression. It's not a threat, Allison. It's just that this is the current gutter that my mind is submerged in. Whether his words made any sense or whether she actually felt safe from it could be argued, since all she felt when hearing him talk was a biting cold in her heart. Then, what if we try to remain as we've always been? She almost had a nervous breakdown as she stuttered that question out. Upon hearing that, Tristan's answer was to merely smile at her, whereas it was Malia who answered the question. Hopefully nothing changes. No matter how nonchalant they tried to play it, the 3 of them have been together since the first day of school, and while the circumstances were bizarre to say the least, none of them were that eager to sever the hind they've created, Tristan included. How? Allison asked in a soft whisper. Malia copied Tristan's smile at that point. Easy. We change nothing. I mean, what's different? I've already been a war coyote and Tristan's always been a vampire, and you? You've always been a pale princess/hunter. See? Nothing's changed. That did bring a laugh out of Allison. In her mind, she was thinking how someone as strong and hard-headed as Malia could also be this cute. Yeah, but you forget the part where I now know that you guys probably howl at a full moon and rip out people's hearts just for the feel of it. Allison chuckled with what was supposed to be a jab, but that's all, Tristan. I prefer just ripping their neck out. I don't get my hands too bloody that way. Allison and Tristan looked at her with a stunned look on their face that said, really, thought meaning different things with the same words. Listen, Allison, you put it at the forefront of your head that at the end of the day, we're supernaturals with a pack. Being at odds with the Argent is something that can't be avoided. You can't continuing playing the center field. Tristan's words doused the atmosphere that was about to bubble with a cold fact that they were all conveniently forgetting. I'm not saying you should choose us or anything like that, but that you should be aware that now that we are at this point, it's only a matter of time before this all ends and you go back to being a hunter. You can't also forget that we've killed a lot of hunters, your people. You can't just ignore that. Trist, are you seriously playing bad cop right now? Malia chided, but he shook his head. I'm not playing anything but just letting her know. He then turned back to Allison and continued his rant. Think it through, Allison. Are we worth it? Well, no rush, you can take the next few days to cool your head off and think everything through. Is this you trying to tell me to stop being friends with you? She asked. No. He replied. This is me trying to help you make a choice based on what you think is most important. Okay, both of you stop. Malia stopped the 2 of them from talking further, wondering why they were actively triggering the other, or at least trying to. No more werewolf/hunter talk for the rest of the day. Cool. The 2 of them nodded their heads while still staring in the other's eyes. The 3 of them then fell silent as they absent-mindedly started picking on the food on their tray. It continued that way until Malia couldn't take it any longer and made a suggestion. Anyone wants to talk about what they did during the weekend? No? Probably not a good time. She smiled at both of them and focused on her food. For Malia, this was the best outcome after what happened on that night. Allison being here in the same table as them, to her, meant that she wasn't just going to up and leave them just from finding out that they were from a different species. She looked at Tristan and pursed her lips together as she knew why he was being the pragmatic one whenever he addressed Allison's issue today. In his own grumpy way, he was caring for her and helping her make a decision that won't come back and hurt her later down the line. Why can't everything ever be simple? Chapter 92, Chapter 89. While Tristan and Malia the new workings of their relationship with Allison, in the principal's office, Gerard made the decision to move to Victoria. Tell him to take the men and find Derek. Since he's so stupid as to keep his betas away from him at such an ill time, who are we not to reward him? Gut him the very chance you get. Hales are known to be the slippery sort, we can't take any other chances. Victoria nodded and left the office to phone Chris and relay Gerard's order. Thankfully the schools will be closed earlier due to Jackson's death so they can immediately provide backup if needed. Today was bound to be a long day. Since there was no lacrosse practice today due to Jackson's death and whatever well-wishing event that was to be held for him and his family, Tristan and Malia saw themselves out of school the moment the announcement was made. Am I missing something? Boyd couldn't help but ask as he saw how awkward everybody was behaving. For some reason, I don't think it's because Jackson died. The four of them were walking and so far not a single person had muttered a word since they left the school, making Boyd feel like the third wheeling fourth wheel. He looked at Tristan but said person just looked unfazed. Malia looked as if she's given up on even trying while Allison looked as if she was walking with some random strangers. Oh, looking at the different reactions on their faces, Boyd's mind spun a web of tales and arrived at one that made him dumbstruck. He looked at Tristan and his face paled as if he'd seen a ghost. You didn't. I don't know what's going through your head, but I can tell you that whatever is playing up there couldn't be any more farther from the truth. Tristan cut him off before he could say anything and make the already dreary atmosphere take another plunger down. It's nothing, Boyd. What do you mean by nothing? I still don't know how to react even now. Allison, in an out-of-character moment, snapped at Malia as she tried downplaying what had happened. Okay. Now Boyd knew that he had stepped on a mine. Just behave as if you don't see anything out of the norm. It should fade away soon, just give it time. Whispered Tristan to Boyd, who wisely nodded. So, does anyone have an idea what happened to Jackson? He expertly changed the subject to something he knew would draw their attention away from, whatever this is. Tristan was all too glad that he didn't have to suffer in such an uncomfortable silence that he happily jumped train. No, heard anything. Boyd looked around them as if checking if anybody was listening to them. They said something destroyed his heart and there were claw marks all over his body, as well as his neck. Well, he was found in the woods, so maybe an animal? Yeah, that's what everyone is saying, but Jackson was at the rave, he was nowhere near the woods, so how did he get there? So you're saying that someone likely killed him and dumped his body in the woods and made it look like an animal killed him? Allison interjected. What? Malia gasped, silently chuckling as she earned a side-eye from Allison. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but it makes more sense to me than the convenient animal attacks that never ends. Well, it is quite the stretch, but it's entirely plausible, right? Yeah. Tristan answered. And get this, someone said they saw a humanoid monster with a tail before the gunshots started going off. I'm telling you, something strange is happening in Beacon Hills. He really believed that there was something happening under the cover of night in Beacon Hills. Well, you might be right, who knows? It's not as if they could do anything to convince him otherwise. There's a curfew to help the investigation of Jackson's death, so you guys should be careful how you walk, see? Boyd left them and separated from his group when they passed his house. Now with just Allison, Malia, and Tristan, the air around them was not as stale as it once was. Jackson. I killed him. I was asking if he was the Kanima. Tristan chuckled at that and nodded his head along as if he didn't catch the lie. Yes, he was. So do you guys just go around killing people, or is there a reason? Seriously, girl, what do you think we are? We're not some type of psychopathic supernatural creatures that can't survive on blood. Malia screamed and had to restrain herself from punching Allison across the face when she saw the ironic look she was giving Tristan. Tristan only feeds on my blood, and all those we kill are all people that go around killing others for whatever twisted and sick reason they have. She explained. Allison slowly nodded and asked again. And what if it's for revenge? Like the Alpha? Then we do nothing. We are not overseers. We just act in our own interests. Even if the hunter part of her told her not to believe anything they say at face value, the part of her that was their friend wholly believed them and trusted what they said. She was naive. She knew that and they knew that, but with what she knew of them and how brutally honest they were, she knew they weren't lying. Tristan did tell her how he would make sure to kill her parents then her, if she ratted them out. If that wasn't honesty, then she didn't know what was. Damn, this isn't what I thought would happen to me when I planned out my high school life. Trust me, you're not the only one who thought so. Malia added. Derek's hideout. Derek held his sides and cursed under his breath as he could feel the poison of the wolf's bane that laced the arrow that shot him through his ribs. How the hell did they find me? He breathed out and tried slowing down his heartbeat and slowly as possible to reduce the poison's rates of propagation. Come on out, Derek. He heard Chris call out and a few gunshots followed, but he remained silent and timed his next attack. My father is already rounding up your betas as we speak. No one is coming to save you, Derek. Maybe we'll finish what Kate started and end the Hale line once and for all. Derek didn't wait to listen if he actually said those words or if it was his head that played it for him word by word. He picked up a pipe and threw it at one of the Argents, impaling him through the neck. The sudden attack took them by surprise, only for another scream to resound through his hideout as he broke the knee of the pudgy guy next to him and sunk his hands into his back and ripped out his spine. He used the man as a shield to block the hail of bullets that followed and turned into a blur in the few-second window it stopped and was upon the next person. He slashed his claws through the man's neck up to his forehead and took his gun and shoved its muzzle into the next person's eye socket and forcefully ripped it out, along with a part of his brain. His body was fully transformed and his skin turned a darker pigment and easily highlighted his blazing red eyes. Throw the flashbangs! Someone shouted, but that turned out to be a bad decision as well as his final words, as the last thing he saw was a blur with red eyes along with his headless body before everything went dark. Foo *K, Chant is dead. Boss, we're losing people. By now, Derek's body had grayed out and his face contorted into something heinous that even Chris felt a chill in his heart when he saw him. He threw a flashbang, but Derek jumped back and covered his eyes right before it blew, saving him from having his retina hurting due to the intense light. Seeing Derek dodging that, he pulled out 2 arrows from his quiver and pierced them into the ground. Derek winced as he felt his eardrums about to explode due to the grating frequency the 2 arrows were emitting. He felt another arrow pierce his arm along with a bullet entering his thighs, but he didn't care. The only thing that pervaded his mind was to make Chris take back those words. He pulled himself up just in time to catch another arrow that was going straight for his chest. Using the surge of adrenaline pumping through his body, he yanked out the other arrow in his arm and bared his fangs at the group of Argents in front of him. His pride as an alpha was at stake. Chapter 93, Chapter 90. While Derek was facing off against a contingent of hunters, his betas, Isaac and Erica, were not in a better position. Right after they left the school, Gerard led his own contingent of hunters to capture them. And unlike Derek, they were easily rounded up as they quickly fell into the hunters' pace. It was not exactly their fault since Gerard had his eyes on them since the very first day he arrived at the school. Isaac and Erica had black veins running all over their body at this point, indicating the severeness of how poisoned they were. We can't continue running, Erica said with labored breaths, as even breathing was now a very painful task for her. There was no way they could escape a veteran such as Gerard's trap, but fortunately for them, they were quick to run away. Unfortunately for them, their luck ran out just as fast as it came. The first part to laying down any efficient plan is to know the terrain and the nature of what you are planning to hunt down, and Gerard wholly embodied that teaching as he used special emitters that could only be heard by those with very advanced hearing, like werewolves, and guarded them straight to the heart of his trap. Since all their strength had long been sapped away due to the poison, they couldn't put up any form of resistance as the hunters sprung up on them and quickly caged them in a mountain ash circle, where they then proceeded to take shots at them until they were just at the inch of their life. Make sure that they are always poisoned. We'll need them as bait for Derek if he manages to escape again. Gerard gave out the order and his men swiftly carried it out. I thought we were going to kill them once we caught them instead of using them like bait. One of the men stated his opinion, but Gerard merely chuckled. Who said anything about letting them stay alive for long? As far as he was concerned, the moment these 2 fell in his hands was the moment they died. Pack them up fast. We are going after their alpha next, he shouted. Gerard was not a fool. He knew something changed on Saturday night, and with the news of Jackson being dead and also what his own coroner wrote in his report, it was highly likely that the young Whitmore was the Kanima. That means the Kanima, Derek, and his pack, along with the vampire, and possibly another unknown werewolf, were all there that night, and the Kanima was the only fatality. A pity. If only they could have killed themselves more, then he wouldn't have had to mobilize a lot of his people for this job, but now was their opportune time. Isaac tried pushing himself off the ground despite his body being wrecked with holes and spasming from the electric shocks that were used in order to knock them out, but his resolve died as his eyes met Gerard's. Oh, a feisty one, hey? It's always the loyal ones that are the most troublesome. Bang! Bang! ! He shot Isaac on both shoulders and the poor sap immediately lost consciousness as blood leaked out of him. We'll use this one to draw him out since he's so eager. In Derek's hideout, the entire place was bloodied and had corpses of different states strewn across it, but none of that mattered for now, as the only thing of focus was the man that was finally on his knees as the fight bled out of him. No, rather than calling him a man, it was better to call him a savage beast. Chris looked at Derek's downed form with cold eyes, and if not for his father's explicit order to bring him in alive, Chris would have pulled the trigger right then and there and ended this whole fiasco once and for all. Radio in. Tell them we caught the Alpha. He turned around and clicked his tongue as he saw the state of the hideout that was now riddled with the body of his men, all caused by one mutated Alpha. His phone rang and an involuntary scowl unconsciously made its way into his face as he saw the caller. Is Derek in bounds? Yes, we are bringing him in now. Good. Since there's no reason for me to come over, I'll be waiting for you at the bunker. The call was cut at that moment, but Chris' face never lost its cold facade. Let's just get it over with, he said with a sigh. On Tristan's side, after they've escorted Allison past her block, the two of them walked to DeMarco's bar while engaging in small conversations along the way. How long do you think it'll take them to find Matt's body in his house? Probably tonight. Everyone who's been involved with Jackson recently is a prime suspect, and I overheard he'd lent Jackson his camera for a brief period, and the fact that he was absent today will make the police want to question him. Only to find out that he's dead. A little funny if you asked me. Malia mused. It's cathartic at best. But I guess I can't say that since I killed both of them. Tristan replied. Upon getting to DeMarco's pub, the slightly pudgy werewolf heartily welcomed them in, since it wasn't every time they chose to visit. Hey guys. Guess the atmosphere is about the kid who died, hey? He asked, even though he was fully aware of who did what and who was what. Yeah, it's a shame though. He was kinda alright if you minus the inflated ego, he said as he walked behind the counter with practiced familiarity. Ha ha ha, I heard about that. DeMarco said with a laugh and commented. You know, Brett's a bit pissed off that you don't come to his games as much as he comes to yours. Tristan paused and looked at DeMarco and silently continued fumbling with the drinks and glasses. The number of times he's been here has given him quite the experience when it comes to mixing drinks and everything else a bartender does behind a counter. DeMarco chuckled as he saw the silent treatment he was being subjected to because Tristan was too tired to come up with a better sounding excuse other than it was a hell of an effort most of the time. Due to the presence of customers in the pub, they didn't gossip much about what they wanted to talk about and just chatted about mundane stuff until DeMarco closed up. So, I guess it's going quite well with the Argent girl if Malia isn't a murdering mess by now, he asked after his last worker clocked out. Malia didn't say anything after being called out by DeMarco and just silently helped him clean up, apparently not in the mood to have him sour her good evening. Honestly, it's the best we could have hoped for. She's still drawn between duty and desire. Morally, I feel that she's a bit grey in the head. Quite screwed up for a girl of her upbringing. Tristan gave his impression of Allison, and inwardly, he'd readily admit that he was quite surprised by the girl and how she was reacting to everything that was rapidly happening around her. DeMarco nodded in understanding. Knowing Tristan's character and how he behaved around people, it made perfect sense to him that Tristan's friends, or those he associated closely with, weren't exactly cut from the same material as the rest of the normal populace. Well, whatever it might be, I'm just glad it's working out for you guys. The Argent's house. Allison hugged her pillow absent-mindedly as her mind wandered through every bit of memory she had of Tristan and Malia. From their first day together, where Malia lent her only pen to Tristan's initial annoyance whenever she was present, and then to when they watched the lacrosse practice for the first time later in the day. From Malia saving her that day from the Alpha to finding out about werewolves and then remembering the bizarre question, well, no longer bizarre question, when they had flat out asked what she would do if they were supernatural creatures. Back then she'd thought that they were just joking around or having one of their funny arguments, but who had known? She did suspect soon after, but finding out that your two best friends were a rare war coyote and an even rarer and feared vampire, was too much even for a teenager like her. But... hee, I wonder if they'll let me see their fangs? Maybe even see Tristan drink blood. Preferably animal blood. Now there was no way she'd be scared of her best friends, even when they both threatened to kill her and her family, since she fully understood, at least partially, where they were coming from and the position they were in. Chapter 94, Chapter 91. Lydia Martin POV. Please stop. The voices won't stop, please mom, help me. Help the voices stop. Lydia held her head under the quilt as she tried to scream, but it felt as if something held her throat and nothing could come out. It scared her even more than the wailing voices she would hear every now and then. It felt as if someone's hand was wrapped tightly around her throat. Someone's frigidly cold hands. Instinctively she knew what it felt like. Death. Heek heek. Please, I don't want to die. Heek heek. It started over a week before Jackson's death, and the way it took her by surprise when she suddenly started hearing people scream and shrill cries for help made her think as if she was going crazy. Why else would she be hearing voices? Something that was synonymous with being mentally disordered. The worst part about it all that finally made her break down into a silently slobbering mess? It wasn't the cold iron-gripped hands of death or that she could hear voices. The very worst part of it wasn't that she could hear those voices. No. It was the fact that she could recognize some of the wailing voices, and one in particular that had been the loudest was none other than the one of Jackson, her ex-boyfriend. She easily recognized it. How could she not? She had tried listening to see if she could hear the voices of anyone else she knew, but the few she heard were so faint that it sounded as if it was coming from somewhere very, very far and away. Her body shivered once more as she heard another round-sounded shrill cry as if a gong just went off in her head. Please just stop. I can't. I'm scared. Right now she no longer looked a single bit that the dignified and the power lady Lydia Martin vibe she always gave off as soon as she left the house. Now she looked no different than the scared shivering mess of a child who's been having the same particular nightmare repeatedly. Not even her mother knew what to do in her current situation. She couldn't exactly tell her mother that she suddenly started hearing ghostly screaming voices of known and unknown people, now could she? They'd throw her straight into Icon House once they caught a whiff of it. She felt lost. It was getting unbearable to the point that she's contemplated killing herself more than once. This wasn't what an outliving teenager like her was supposed to be thinking about. She, under no circumstances, should be contemplating suicide when she hasn't even seen a bit of life outside high school. But unfortunately enough, this was her reality now. Hopefully it will pass away soon, but she knew. She somehow knew that couldn't live without the voices. They were now part of her life. Someone please help me. Her lips quivered as she hopelessly muttered. She would give up anything to end this nightmare. Gerard walked through the bunker towards the room where Derek was strapped up, and a smile crept up his face. How fitting, don't you think? Chained up like the dog you are. Derek's body was pale and the black blood painting his body painted a very nasty picture, but despite the unsavory state he was in, he forced himself to raise up his head and drive a pointed glare at Gerard. Since we are both busy men, I'll get straight to the point. I want something that only you can give, and you will give it to me if you want to have whatever remains of your pack. Derek's eyes wandered around for a bit before it lit up in realization, and he managed to crack a derisive smile. You want it, don't you? The bite. Gerard grabbed him by the throat the moment those words left his mouth, causing Derek to grunt as he felt a blunt weapon slowly being driven into his body with a steady force he never believed someone as old as Gerard could have. Don't presume that you have me figured out. You will give me the bite, or else I will make you watch with rapt attention as I take your last family left on this earth. He threatened. He pulled out the metal pole from Derek's body and left him to his own thoughts as he struggled to heal the open wound on his poisoned body. As Gerard left Derek's bunker room, he blotted the door behind him and started a violent fit of coughs. He dug his hands into his overcoat pocket and brought a pill box, cracked it open and swallowed a few pills from it. He took in deep breaths before going to another room where Isaac and Erica were kept. The latter was in a much better state when compared to the former, though they were both inching ever so close to death with every passing second. Unfortunately for the both of you, your alpha is proving to be a little stubborn, so why don't we work on a convincing presentation in the meantime? He had to say that he loved the way that they shivered in fright as he held up a few trinkets he wanted them to play with. With your blood steadily being drained out and a new dose of poisoned nutrients being filtered into your body, I don't think you'll be making any meaningful movements. He picked up a barbed whip and walked towards Isaac, who at this point was severely shivering as he understood the world of pain Gerard was about to introduce him to. Don't worry. I'll be gentle, haha. These old bones can't handle too much strain after all. He swung the whip at Isaac's chest and the whip immediately pierced his body and was stuck there. Isaac could only groan in pain as he didn't even have the sufficient energy to scream out. He whimpered and struggled to wiggle, but no matter how he struggled, there was nothing he could do as Gerard brutally pulled out the whip and whipped it again with him. Isaac's muffled screams and groans were the only thing that echoed through the room, along with Erica's soft cries and the occasional whipping sound of barbed whip hitting flesh. It continued like that for a few minutes before Gerard stopped after confirming that going any further would result in Isaac's death, and he didn't want that, at least not yet. He turned to the camera in the room and spoke loudly, this will happen every day until you learn to be obedient. He smiled as he saw the tiny flinches on the female and almost dead beta. The best way to break the bond between a werewolf's pack is a two-pronged attack targeting them both physically and mentally. This was just the start of him destroying the bonds between Derek and his pack. He wouldn't lie and say that he wasn't trying to break Derek as fast as he could, but he also hopes that Derek might make it a little enjoyable for him for the duration of their little play. The reason why he was doing this was simple: he was at the end of his lifespan, and having cancer at this time of his life was just reducing whatever he had left to a few years. The bite was something he needed if he wanted to extend his life and have any hope of defeating the terminal disease. And he'd do anything to get it. Noah Stilinski POV. Noah sighed once more as he brought in the box he carried from his office inside his house. Dad? What are you doing at home so early? And what are those for? His son, Styles, greeted him as soon as he walked past the door. He stood there awkwardly in front of Styles, not knowing how to respond until he was called out again. Dad? Yeah, well, I was fired, yet. He said with a despondent chuckle. It was decided by those higher up that I wasn't doing a good job protecting Beacon Hills, and with all the recent deaths happening in the town, people just don't feel safe anymore, so yet. I'm no longer the sheriff of Beacon Hills County. He didn't say anything else and just took his box up the stairs to his room. Maybe he'll crack open a new bottle of wine today to celebrate for all his years of service and unsolved cases. If not that, maybe he'd take a few sips to quench this borrowing murky feeling that was engulfing his very soul. Whatever the reason may be, all he knew was that. I really need a drink. Chapter 95, Chapter 92. The next day of school opened up with yet another shocking news that another student of Beacon Hills was found dead in his house. Maybe it was because of the news of Jackson's death the day before, or maybe it was the stress and piled up fear of whether they were going to die next. The whole school erupted in chaos and would have taken to the streets had the cops not been called into action and stopped them from rioting. It was pretty disturbing news when the 2 days dead, rotten, maggot-infested body of Matt was found inside his own room with no evidence whatsoever of who caused his death. His neck was broken, and even if there were fingerprints on the neck, the print would have to match one in the police database before they can proceed on that front. So Matt was the master of the Kanima? Allison asked Tristan while ignoring his pointed stare as she took one of his fries. Yes. He curtly replied, and then added. And apparently he was stalking you, bordering obsession if you asked me. His room was full of your pictures plastered around. He smirked as he saw the color drain out of her already pale face. Be expecting the police to question you any time today. Allison furrowed her brows as she tried imagining what Tristan was saying, and her face immediately contorted into a disgusted expression. I don't think I've ever met him alone in any scenario. Did you find out why he was killing all those people? She asked. Tristan briefly explained all what he had heard from Matt and the crux of his motives as well as his final moments, leaving Allison unsure on how to react. Sure, she was happy that the reason for all the death happening for the past month was now dead, but the reason for it, although she could somehow relate with the trauma it caused, she felt it was petty. Don't think too much of it. It's just one of those things that tell you that they are some stupid people in this world. Allison nodded and then shifted her focus to something else. The Kanima, compared to you, how strong was it? Well, believe it or not, it was stronger. At least to an extent. I can tell you for sure that there was no way in hell Derek's pack or your family was beating it. But you killed it, right? Doesn't that make you way stronger than it is? I'm different. I'm the exception, not the rule. Maybe it has something to do with predatorial instincts or something like that, but it basically put me as a night creature above the Kanima in the apex pyramid. Maybe it was Jackson's instinctual fear of me or Matt's apprehension, or maybe it stemmed from the Kanima's subconscious, but its first reaction was always to run from me. You might not believe it, but creatures like us, vampires and werewolves, we feed on that. Like an adrenaline boost. Yes, something like that. It's like trying to fight a guy and the first thing he does is buckle and turn away to run. The confidence boost that gives you, even though you might be slightly weaker, makes the difference seem negligible. He explained and then added. It might be another thing, but that's basically my take on it. Allison bit her lips as she looked at Tristan, contemplating something that has been on mind since the previous day. With the way you're looking at me, I know you are probably thinking of asking something generic, and my answer for it is no. Allison grumbled irritably to hide her embarrassment at being found out like that and can't help but whine. Come on. One of my best friends is a real-life mythical vampire, and apparently one that controls blood. It's obvious that I'm curious about you as a mythological creature. Tristan cocked a confused eye at her and asked, "But Malia is a work IOD, I haven't seen you being as curious as her as you are of me." To his question, Allison looked at him as if he was now the one acting weird. "Malia is a work IOD. You are a vampire. From what I know, she's not much different from a werewolf unlike you on the other hand." "True, but it's a bit weird that you quickly became interested. I was hoping for a few days, or maybe even a week of awkwardness from you, so consider my present expression a valid one." She felt a bit irritated with Tristan bringing up what she was doing a good job in forgetting, but just groaned and laid her head on the table with her hands stretched out. "I don't know how to think through it, so I'm just doing what comes first to mind. So please sympathize with me for a while," she said. Tristan nodded and left it at that. How she went about it was up to her to figure out. He turned around and looked around the cafeteria. "Come to think of it, have you seen Isaac or Erica today?" She looked around and shook her head. "No, I haven't." "You think Derek and his pack are up to something?" "I don't know. Maybe they are laying low after what happened with Jackson and Malia. I'd probably do that if I'm being watched by you hunters." Allison frowned at his words and even surprised herself a bit with the way her instant reply came out. "I'm not an hunter, at least not yet." She was not comfortable with the current topic, but she only had herself to blame as she was the one who had brought it up, so she changed it. "Have you seen or heard from Lydia?" "I tried calling her but it all went to voicemail," she said with a concerned frown and asked, "Think she's okay?" "Probably not," he truthfully answered. "She wasn't quite mentally stable for the past few weeks. Only God knows how Jackson's death must have further deteriorated her mental stability. We should visit her. She'll need her friends with her during such a time, or she might come out with mental scars, you know." Tristan shrugged. The guidance counselor was concerned about her, but she turned it down. "You should visit her though, because you're right, she needs a friend now more than ever." "I guess I can take that as you not coming," she stated, and took his silence as his answer. She debated on whether to take Malia or not and ultimately decided to, hoping she won't regret it and worsen Lydia's condition by bringing the two in close proximity. She still had a few questions to ask him, but she decided to take it slowly. They were still friends, and if nothing changed, they'll remain that way till they graduate high school. "I have all the time in the world to find out as much as I can about them during that time," she thought as she saw Tristan walk away to look for Boyd after finishing his food. "Hopefully Malia doesn't throw a fit when I drag her to Lydia's." She chuckled at her own words, since she could vividly picture something like that happening. Since school closed early today due to the news of Matt's death, Allison drove herself and Malia to Lydia's house after making a call to their landline with, fortunately for them, someone picked up Lydia's mother and told them to come over. "I still don't see why you forcefully insist I come along with you on a friendly visit to visit someone I would say I hate." Allison rolled her eyes in exasperation as she parked her car in front of Lydia's house. She lost count of how many times Malia has made the same complaint since she told her about the visit during school hours. "Be nice, Malia. Someone she loved just died, and besides it's not like you have anything important to do at home anyways. Just because I don't have anything to do doesn't translate to me needing to do something. Being lazy is a choice, you know." She shushed the girl to end her whining rants and knocked on the door and waited until Lydia's mother opened the door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Martin. I came with a friend, Malia." "Oh, Allison, you're here. Come on in, girls." She ushered them in, and a concerned countenance fell on her face as she closed the door and faced them. "She doesn't come down, even forgets to eat until I beg her to. It's been worse since Jackson died and I don't know what else to do." Allison hugged the middle-aged woman before she could break down in tears and comforted her. "Just get some sleep, Mrs. Martin. Hopefully we can talk to her and figure out what's wrong with her." Though she had no idea on how to go about what she said, she needed to say it just so the distraught mother could at least let her mind rest easy for a while. She looked like she really needed it. Since this wasn't the first time she came here, she needed no directions and went straight to Lydia's room with Malia tagging along. "Lydia, it's me, Allison. I came with Malia. I'm coming in." She knocked on the door and waited a few seconds but didn't receive any answer before she turned the knob and pushed the door open. She wasn't sure what she was expecting about Lydia's state when she came here, but what she saw definitely made her falter. Scattered all over the room were books and pieces of papers with weird drawings on them. Lydia. Chapter 96, Chapter 93. Lydia. Allison called out to the figure curled under the sheets. "She's shivering." Malia said as she caught the tiny shakes of the duvet and she could hear the sound of teeth clattering in the cold. Lydia, are you awake? Allison called out to her again but once again received only silence. As soon as she sat on Lydia's bed, she started feeling Lydia's shivering which felt too rapid and heavy. She pulled open the duvet covering Lydia and gasped in disbelief when she saw someone that looked vastly different from the Lydia she talked to last week. Oh wow, that's one hell of a glow-up. Allison glared at Malia in reprimand while the girl in question just raised her hands in surrender. Jokes aside, she looks like crap. Is this what breakup followed by the death of your ex does to you? Malia asked as she circled around the bed to get a closer look of Lydia. Of course not. She even feels cold. Allison said and got a sarcastic retort from Malia in response. Isn't that what you feel when you are cold? Allison rolled her eyes and completely gave up on Malia but still grabbed her hand and placed it against Lydia's neck. See? She literally feels cold to the touch when she's supposed to be burning up. You're right, this isn't normal. Malia said and touched Lydia in different parts of her body but the girl remained unresponsive and freezing cold. What should we do? We should rush her to the hospital. Allison got up from the bed and was about to go tell Lydia's mother but Malia held her back by the arm. What? Can't you see she's dying? Malia scoffed at her words and calmed her down before she did something stupid or blew it out of proportion in her panic. Though she had to agree with Allison that Lydia looked like she might die any minute now. Lydia looked pale, like zombie pale, and her once vibrant hair had dulled so much that it looked dusty. Her eyelids were drawn down in huge bags and she had lost weight. She looked nothing like the proud Lydia Malia always pictured in her head that she couldn't help but feel pity for her. She looked around the room that resembled a dump and picked one of the random papers lying around and looked at it with an impressed face. What? Is there something interesting on it? Malia passed the paper to question and chuckled as the girl's face suddenly looked uncomfortable. If I'm not wrong then that looks like a sucker being tortured by spirits. Didn't know Queen Bee here had a thing for horrors and ghosts. Allison dropped the paper and picked up another one and the uncomfortable look on her face became more pronounced upon seeing help, written all over the paper. They dropped that one and picked up another one and the uncomfortable feeling in her heart started rising. By now Malia had noticed Allison acting weird and so she sifted through the scattered pages around her and very soon her expression mirrored Allison's. The hell? This is getting creepy. She still appeared calm in contrast to Allison who was currently hyperventilating. Malia. Allison handed her a paper with shaky hands and it only took a glance at the picture scribbled on it for Malia to understand why. Painted on it was an eerily familiar picture of two people with one having his hands inside the other one's chest. The most unsettling thing about the picture was that the one who was being attacked had a tail. It's just a coincidence, right? Allison stuttered as she asked that, hoping Malia had a perfectly reasonable explanation for all this. Malia on the other hand kept the paper aside and started checking through the other pieces lying around the room. This is... Allison showed her another crudely drawn picture of someone snapping another person's neck. Could be Matt or maybe a hunter. Malia gave an offhand comment as she glanced at the picture and went to looking through them. Seeing the way the room was filled with the scattered sheets of papers, they first gathered them together and started moving through them hoping to get whatever this bizarre scenario was trying to tell. Keeping an eye on Lydia and the other on what they were doing, they spent the next hour arranging and rearranging the pictures to a somewhat progressing order. And they were greatly shocked by the results to say the least. The pictures drawn all over the room told a sequence of some of the people who had recently died in Beacon Hills and though the images weren't anything impressive, it clearly captured the last moments of the deaths of the people drawn on it. Jackson, Matt, the hunters at the rave, Peter Hale, the Omega Malia once fought and some of the people the Kanima killed. But the scary part didn't end there. If I'm not wrong then that guy should be your grandfather and the big bad over there is Derek. Malia pointed out the obvious far to that was in front of their faces. I mean, this can all be a sick coincidence, right? Maybe the recent series of people dying got to her more than we could ever know and she started drawing this as a way for her psyche to cope. Allison gave her opinionated statement but she didn't sound all that convinced by her own words, much less Malia. And she just somehow draws everyone's death, even deaths that no one knew anything of like that of the former Alpha, the Omega, and the other hunters? Yeah, I don't buy that. Malia refuted her point. Then what are you suggesting? That she's psychic or something? Allison asked rhetorically but the dead look on Malia's face made her retract her question. You seriously believe that? Allison, I'm a wercoyote and Tristan is a vampire. You come from a centuries-old family of hunters, but somehow the prospect of someone being psychic is such an outlandish thing to you. Allison wanted to answer, but there were no words left in her mouth concerning the current situation, so she just threw her hands up in the air signaling that she had given up. I don't know what to think anymore, Malia. And there's a depiction of my grandfather having his throat ripped, but clearly that hasn't happened yet, so how do you explain that? She shifted her concentration to another area, one she thought was more important. Malia shrugged, as she didn't have many ideas about that unless for the only thing that came to her mind. Maybe it's something that will happen. Allison sighed and frowned as she ran her hands through Lydia's shivering body. I'm lost. Maybe we can find somebody to help us in understanding what all this means, she suggested. And do you know any psychics? And before you say your family might help, it's best you know that they are more likely to tear her apart than genuinely try to help her. Malia gave her own 2 bits. So what do we do? How am I supposed to know? I've never seen something like this once before, nor has Tristan. Allison was about to say something but stopped herself as Lydia abruptly jolted awake with her eyes open in a daze. Lydia? Are you okay? Allison asked, the unsettling feeling in her heart bubbling as she saw Lydia's vacant eyes. I think she's trying to write something, don't wake her yet. Malia said as she saw Lydia's hands moving in circles and pushed a clean sheet of paper along with a pen to Lydia, who subconsciously picked it up and started scribbling on it while the 2 clueless girls watched on. While something was going on over at Lydia Martin's house, something else of a gory nature was taking place in the bunker where Derek and his pack were kept and chained up. Isaac's scream resounded through the cold walls, causing Erica to break into terrified sobs every time she watched as Gerard tortured the poor boy just to get something from Derek. She wasn't even in a normal sense of mind to find out what sort of deal Gerard wanted to strike with Derek that he was continually refusing. All that was in her mind were prayers for the torture to stop and let it not be transferred to her. Hold on, now. This might hurt a little. Gerard's voice, along with the hammering sounds that followed and Isaac's pained shouts, as he nailed a rod into each of Isaac's limbs, completely broke Erica. What a shame! Gerard snorted, seeing as not only Erica, but Isaac, had passed out from the torture. Can't handle this much and yet you wave around your misplaced pride of being a werewolf. He dropped the bloody hammer and washed his hands and left the room to visit his favorite prisoner. I wonder how long you can last after watching me methodologically break your oh so precious betas. I hear the pain of losing a beta is like a mother losing her cherished child, so tell me, how do you feel, Derek? Derek weakly raised his head to look at Gerard with dim lights in his eyes. I promise, you. I'll kill you if I break out of these bonds, he said through gritted teeth, making Gerard chuckle to himself with mirth in his eyes. He cranked up the dial voltmeter to the max for a few seconds and enjoyed himself with the sight of Derek being electrocuted. Just like the Hales before you, your stubbornness will prove your downfall. Give me what I want and I'll put an end to your misery, were the last words he gave Derek for the day before leaving him in the dark room to battle against his guilt-ridden thoughts. Chapter 97, Chapter 94. So let me get this straight. Lydia is kinda going crazy after drawing pictures of the people who died, and not only is she drawing pictures of dead people but also of people who might/will die. Yeah, at least that's what I think, Malia said. And Allison? Tristan's voice came over the speaker. Well, she seems to be in denial. Malia snorted as her friend tried denying it, but no words came from her mouth. You think she's one of those dark voodoo people they told us about? She neglected from mentioning the name of their alpha because though she considered Allison trustworthy, there were certain invisible unspoken rules and lines that shouldn't be crossed without Satomi's express approval. The fact still remained that Allison was an Argent. A dark druid? Honestly, I have no idea. I'm just as surprised as you by this, Tristan said. This was almost as surprising as when he found out about Allison being a hunter. His image of Lydia was not much different than everybody else. Want me to come over? Malia shook her head and replied, no need. I don't think we are in any kind of trouble with Lydia, though if you can try finding out what you can. I'll send over some of the pictures she drew and the most recent one. Got it. Hearing that, Malia turned to look at Allison and tilted her head at the displeased frown on her face. What? Nothing. Okay, that's a lie. Tell me, what's up with you? Malia pressed on. Allison sighed and looked at her with a wry smile. Malia was known for having no tact and very little consideration for anyone's mood, her included, so the chance of her letting this go was minuscule at best. That's an unfair ability of yours, catching other people's like that in the open. It's not as simple as you think. Someone like your dad or grandpa would be hard to get a read on unless they let out a slip, but I know you are diverting. Malia said while giving her a look to fess up. And fess up she did. It's just that seeing you guys being so reliable and competent makes me feel a little bit envious, okay, more than a little bit. I mean, you guys can confidently fight against an alpha, a serial killing Kanima, while also fending off against skilled hunters. And me? I'm just the cute frail princess with a slightly better than average archery skill. Saying those words out loud, to Malia no less, made her feel as if her insides were being squeezed, making her shiver in disgust. She smiled deprecatingly and continued. And you know the funny part? It's that we hunters are supposed to be at the top when it comes to the predator-prey chain. I just don't see myself measuring up. It wasn't just about Malia and Tristan, but also her dad and grandfather. She came from a line of likely legendary hunters, and the expectation and competence that came with it automatically fell on her shoulders since she was bound to one day lead the family. But she just couldn't see herself doing something like that no matter how optimistic she tried picturing it. Wow. It's just, must be hard for you, hey. Admittedly, I don't get the whole honor and moral code thing you must have in your family, so I can't really say anything about it. Even if I could, I don't think I would. Sounds too cringy for me. Right. What did she expect from Malia to say? Just be yourself, or at least be strong, or important enough in your case, that others won't care or have too much say on how you act. Kate was the same, wasn't she? Allison nodded but remained silent and trailed her eyes to the passed-out figure of Lydia. Are all my friends supernatural? Even Boyd too? Such a thought presented itself to her for a brief second, but she didn't think much about it because she already had an answer to that, and that was that she'll re-evaluate them the same way she did Tristan and Malia. What do you think she will do if she finds out that Tristan killed Jackson? It was a worrying thought considering what they witnessed her do. Malia on the other hand nonchalantly waved it off. Probably go hysterical. Maybe even try to kill us. It'll be a pain considering the current tense atmosphere, but it's nothing we can't handle. Allison wanted to ask what exactly she meant by that but refrained from doing so, already aware of the most likely answer. Maybe she can do something and try to stop her friends from killing each other, or at least one of them from killing the other. Which one she imagined doing the killing was not that hard to picture either. Anyone ever told you that you worry too much over many minor things? Malia asked and took the initiative to wipe off the sweat on Lydia's face. I think she's getting better, but she's still as cold and stiff as a popsicle. The two girls continued tending to Lydia's condition, which they had nothing to no idea about but persisted regardless. Seeing Malia showing the slightest bit of care for Lydia in her own little way made Allison's heart lighten a good bit. She put the fact that her friends and family were trying to kill each other to the back of her head and for once decided to follow Malia's advice a little bit seriously. For the things she currently had no control over, she mentally shelved them to the side for now and tried to focus her 100% on helping to nurse her supernaturally comatose friend back to good health, and maybe even stop them from trying to kill themselves. A girl can dream, right? Who knows, maybe it might not even come to pass. She thought to herself. Tristan Hayes POV. I looked at the pictures of images and writing Malia and sent over and couldn't help but feel the slight creeping in of a headache, a small one, but a headache nonetheless. What's up with the kids at school turning out to be supernaturals every passing week? I said to myself as I fished out my phone to call Grandma. We just barely fought against a rare alpha and an even rarer Kanima, and another one just pops up to take their place. Hoping she doesn't start the next murder spree for some petty reason like someone ignoring her or cutting in front of her in a line. I laughed lightly to myself as I said that because I can actually picture something like that happening when it comes to Lydia. Just as I was about to press the call button to ring up Grandma, my phone started vibrating with an incoming call from Brett. Brett, what's up? Nothing much. Just wanted to ask if you are up for hanging out tonight. He saw no reason to reject, and even if he had, he still might not. Sure. Got any plans? I asked. Brett fell silent for a few seconds and was about to answer, but it looked as if someone snatched the phone from him as a familiar voice came through. Is that you, Tristan? You guys are coming, right? Yes, I'm coming, Tierney. Got anything for fun, or are we just doing movies? I'm in either way. We can do bowling. Regular bowling like normal people, or some other games before closing off with movies at your house. How about it? She excitedly proposed. Got no problem with me. I said. I called out to her before she could pass back the phone since I wanted to ask if they knew anything about Lydia. Hey Tierney, can you put the phone on loudspeaker if you and Brett are there alone? Sure, go on. I then explained to her what Malia had told me about Lydia a few minutes ago and even sent them the pictures. I don't know, man. She could be one of many things you know. Maybe a druid, might not necessarily be a dark one, a witch with connection to dead spirits, a psychic, who knows? Brett replied. Well, that just leaves me to ask Grandma if she can help narrow it down. What's up with that school of yours anyway? It's like everything that happens has some sort of tie to it. Should have chosen Devonford when you had the chance, 'cause your school sounds a bit haunted to me. Brett joked. We didn't talk much after that as I ended the call and called Grandma. Tristan dear, you've been calling me a lot recently. Anything wrong this time around? That brought out a wry smile out of me and made me feel that maybe Brett's words about Beacon Hills High had some semblance of truth to it. I promptly told her what Malia had told me, leaving her silent for a few seconds before she asked a question. You said she drew pictures of some of the recent deaths? Send me those images. I did as she asked and waited for her verdict, since if anyone that I know of had the possible answer, then it was her. I don't think she's a dark druid or even a witch, since doing something like this would require a sacrifice of sorts or something along similar lines, but since Malia didn't see anything that might relate to magic or mysticism of any kind, only one creature comes to my mind. I may be wrong, but it's the only thing that I can come up with. And that is the Wailing Woman, a Banshee. Chapter 98, Chapter 95. Derek Hale POV. Where did I go wrong? That was the question that had been plaguing Derek's mind since he woke up strapped these metal bars for who knows how many days it's been. The possible answer to that question was something he was aware of, even before his capture, but acknowledging it left a sickening taste in his mouth. One more sour than the taste of him swallowing his own blood. He had become arrogant and less cautious. On another hand, the hunters that caught him had been more cautious and patient for the most opportune for them to act. And despite his struggles and fierce retaliation befitting of a Hale Alpha, he still ended up being captured. And the worst part of it all was that his arrogance and short-sightedness had led to his two betas being captured and tortured before his eyes. More than the boiling rage he felt every time he saw Gerard's face, the pain and regret he felt every time he watched Isaac being brutally tortured just seemed to break something in him. Even when he tried not to watch it, the sick old man made sure that the screams echoed through the loudspeakers and metal pipes in this room. Forgive me, Isaac. Erica. He apologized to them in his heart as he knew that despite his answer, Gerard could still decide to prolong their torture just for the kick of it before killing them once he got bored and had satiated whatever twisted sense of revenge he had. No, not revenge. It couldn't be that. If he had been hell-bent on revenge, he would have tortured Derek too, more so than he did Isaac. Derek had no delusion that Gerard was going to let him live after this, or any of them for that matter. This was another reason why he refused to give Gerard the bite he so badly wanted. The bite wasn't just a way for an alpha to gain a new beta. It was much more significant than that. If it had just been about gaining a beta, Peter wouldn't have put much, if any effort at all, into bringing Scott into the fold and turning him into a killer. He would have just found another person willing to join him in his fight for revenge in exchange for the price of power. The bite was more of a ritual that spiritually bonded the alpha to their betas in a way that no one can ever understand. It created a bond so strong that sometimes the alpha can even feel if their beta were ever in grave distress or dead. Rather than an underling, the betas were more like children, a fact that even the most psychopathic alpha could attest to even if they could care less about it. So how could he do that? How could he give a part of his soul and bond it with Gerard's? Someone that tortured his beta. The same man that will kill them after getting what he wanted from him, and then kill him too to take his alpha spark. His insides twisted just at the mere thought of having any kind of positive relationship with Gerard, certainly not a familial one. Ha ha ha. What can I even do at this point? One way or the other, he is bound to get what he wants. This was something he knew, that whether he accepted it or not, it would happen regardless. He would cave in at some point once the mental and physical torture becomes too much for him. Though it is said that an alpha can fall back to being a beta if the foundation of his ascension was destroyed, it was something that rarely ever happens. With everything laid out for him like this, Derek only had one thing to say to himself. If I get out of here, I'll make sure you feel the same pain and regret I'm feeling. Night came, and even though one of them wanted to stay behind and try to help as much as they could, they had to leave, but not before promising Mrs. Martin that they will be back the next day. Whether it was because they tried waking her up or something else, Lydia's condition started getting progressively better once the evening came. Malia had Allison drive her to where Tristan texted her to come for a formerly unplanned hangout. Allison knew their situation, so she didn't ask any questions after knowing they were hanging out with Brett and possibly other members of their pack, and just drove home to catch a good night's sleep after everything that happened today. "Malia, over here," Lori called out as soon as she stepped inside the game center. "Damn, girl. It feels as if you are getting bigger in the little time I don't see you." Tierney let out a whistle as she saw Malia, who in her eyes, was growing in extra size in certain places. "Hey, T. Sorry, I can't say the same about you." Though sounding like Bash, it wasn't, as the girl in question had the same proportions as her. "Where's Trist and Brett?" "They went to pay for the drinks and reserve a spot for us," Lori answered as she sat on Malia's left side, keeping the latter in between her and Tierney. "I heard you were with Allison looking after Lydia. How is she doing?" Lori asked, more after Allison than Lydia. She and Brett had hung out with them and Allison one time, and she hadn't had a chance to meet the girl for another hangout since then. "Allison? She's all right. She was the one who dropped me off, but I can't answer for Lydia since I have no idea what's wrong with her." I would have loved to meet Allison, but maybe another time. She's gotta be pretty fun to be around if Malia is still friends with her even after everything," Tierney commented. To her, other than a pretty face and a good body, Malia was probably harder to keep as a friend than Tristan. "You just need to understand that the latter isn't much of a talker and you can work through that. But Malia, well. Seems like Malia is already here, so let's get the night started." Their conversation paused there when Brett and Tristan came back with refreshments and their tickets. The next morning, Tristan groggily woke up in the living room and found himself entangled with 4 other people. They had watched a trilogy after having fun outside and just crashed there on the floor, too tired to sleep in their rooms. He tapped Tierney, who was the closest person to his hands, and left her to wake the others while he rushed to clean up and prepare for school, knowing there was no way to avoid being late this time around. The others quickly got up and were glad they couldn't suffer hangovers due to them being werewolves. "Thirsty?" He nodded at Malia's offer and sunk his fangs into her neck and drank more than a few satisfying gulps. He released his fangs from her neck and let out an involuntary sigh of exhilaration as he felt his blood jolting with excitement after being invigorated. "Bye guys." Malia waved at the other 3 who had gotten ready and decided to have breakfast before leaving. "Don't forget to lock up when you leave." Even with Tristan's superb driving while going above the speed limit, they still couldn't beat the time and were late for the first period, and Tristan ended up being called to the guidance counselor office for the second time. "Come in, Tristan." The voice of Ms. Morrill beckoned him in after the first knock. "How did you know it was me?" he asked after taking his seat in front of her. Somehow he just couldn't make heads or tails when it came to the woman in front of him. Maybe it is a therapist thing. It would after all prove counterproductive if just about anyone could get a read on a therapist. Even if he knew that wasn't it, he wasn't about to put his legs in unknown waters. People's secrets were theirs to keep, and he preferred it that way. Epictetus did say that keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern, and be clear that what belongs to others is their business and none of yours. "You are the only one I made an appointment with at this time," she said with a calming and disarming smile. Tristan just nodded and didn't dwell on it anymore and asked her reason for requesting his presence. "I heard from Mrs. Martin, Lydia's mother, that 2 of her friends, Allison and Malia, visited her daughter, and it seems like she's doing a bit better than the past few days." "A most glad news. I don't understand." Tristan voiced the confusion that he didn't bother hiding from showing on his face. "Yes, Allison and Malia visited her yesterday, but why am I called here? If anything, it should be them here, not me." She composedly nodded, having already expected a question like this. "It's just that I don't understand why you won't visit her, even reluctant to do so, might I add." Now he was just lost. "It's nothing of that sort, and I see no reason in doing so, more so when I'm not that close to her in the first place," he said, hoping the woman would just drop it and he could go back to class, but it seemed like she had other plans. "Even when you are the only one in this school, aside from me, who she received genuine advice from." "Hey." Seeing his further confusion, she slowly explained. "Before she had a mental breakdown, we had a few sessions where I asked her if she had anyone she could turn to for advice because you were the only one she mentioned absent-mindedly. So. He had no idea when he gave Lydia any sort of advice. They did talk a few times, but that was it. And during all those times, he rarely if ever attempted to prolong their conversation. I'm just looking out for a hurt little girl and what she needs right now is someone she might consider listening to," she said, sounding almost as if pleading. "I just want you to try is all. I heard she was looking for you a few times before she stopped coming to school. It could have been that she was looking for someone she trusts might truly listen to her. Please, consider doing it for someone who might really need your help if nothing else." Chapter 96. Throughout the rest of the following periods, Tristan's mind went back to his conversation with Marin Moral and he still couldn't make out head or tails of what exactly she wanted. He doubted it was just for the simple reason of helping out a sick student or anything of that nature. He had absolutely nothing on that claim except that his instincts felt so. And the thing that cemented that thought was that something out of the natural was happening with Lydia, and if Satomi's words rang true, then Lydia wasn't some druid or mystic, but a banshee. A creature that can see, predict, and cause the death of people around her. Now you see why he was very skeptical of all this? The timing of all this set off more than a few warning bells that he fully believed were ringing true, but the thing about vampires that he had discovered a little while back was that just like werewolves were known to be impulsive and prone to run berserk once set off, vampires had what was called a natural flaw. Something that balanced the scales of their existence, so to speak. What then was this natural flaw? Of course it was none other than his lowered sense of danger. Not in the sense that he had trouble sensing an attack aimed at him, which obviously couldn't be the case as he boasted an agility only surpassed by the Kanima, but the fact that even after identifying a threat around him, Fort's thought would be that there was no reason he would be attacked. No matter how much he tried, he just found it hard to react to a threat unless it attacked him first. Allison was a different case because he truly had no idea, and when he did, she was already his and Malia's friend. He even did the same thing with the guidance counselor, Marin Moral, who despite knowing something was sketchy about her, just found the easier choice to keep to himself and hoped she minded hers, which she obviously didn't. "What's gotten you so gloomy? I mean extra gloomy?" Boyd's voice cut his thoughts of worry, making him momentarily shelve them aside to think of them later. Probably when he got nothing else to think about. "It's a bit complicated," Tristan simply said, tossing the thought to the back seat and took the front. "What are you up to?" "Nothing much. Coach called off training for this week, and even when me and some of the boys tried just tossing the ball around, it just felt somewhat dry." He dropped his bag to his side frustratingly. "I doubt training will be back to what it used to be." "Probably not," Tristan hummed. The lacrosse players were the ones affected by Jackson's death the most. He had led them to winning championships as their star player and captain before Tristan and McCall came along. He had more rapport with the players, just after coach, and he was hell of a good captain all things considered. "I'm not even in the mood to do anything else, at least for another week," Boyd said in a downcast voice and took out a bottle of water to drink. "What about you? Got anything better to do than just moping around?" Tristan was about to answer when Boyd continued and spoke as if he just said something stupid and obvious. "Of course, you don't. You looked more gloomy than I did when I came here." They were sitting on the bleachers of the basketball court with a few other students scantily scattered around the hall, some just keeping to themselves like Tristan while others were hanging out with their friends like Boyd was currently doing. The two of them fell into a momentary silence that didn't last more than a few moments as someone came to join them. Two someones. "Hey guys!" Boyd greeted them since they were by his side, which made the two people who just came identify Boyd and returned the greeting. They had already sat down when they noticed the person sitting next to Boyd and stilled for a minute before taking their seats as if nothing happened. "Scott and Styles haven't been having the best of days recently." "Well, mostly Styles, since Scott was actually stress-free at the moment except for one pressing issue." Styles on the other hand looked irritably fed up as not only did his dad lose his job, 2 members of their team died, and even though they knew who probably did it, they couldn't do anything about it. Plus something was wrong with Lydia. He had visited a few days ago and her situation wasn't good at all. What worried him even more were the pieces of paper with questionable pictures and thought-provoking words. As usual, Scott had absolutely no idea of what was going on, and even when they tried getting in touch with Derek, they couldn't find him. It's like he and his pack just upped and disappeared. The future at this very moment looked very cloudy for him. He stole a glance at Tristan, who just continued sitting there with his head raised up and lost in his thoughts with the look of it. "How is it going, Boyd? You guys don't look so good, at least that's something everybody agrees on." Styles opened up a friendly conversation just to pass time since it was the reason they were here in the first place. Boyd deflated at Styles' question that perfectly hit home despite the sarcasm in it. "Hell, even that hit home too. What about you guys? What are you doing now? Boyd asked the two of them. Us? Well, for starters, we are trying to solve an existential crisis and we are halfway there. Second is guessing our decision of if high school was actually worth coming to. Styles said with a cheery tone that didn't tell of his inner struggles. What of him? He asked, pointing at Tristan who just sat there motionlessly since the beginning. Him? I have absolutely no idea. He's been like that since I came here. Boyd said. Not much later, Tristan just stood up and told Boyd that they'd catch up some other time and left, not even caring of the presence of Scott and Styles. Ah! Look at him go! He's about to face the world with a big foo *ku, I tell you. Styles said with good humor, shaking his head as if he was of an older generation acknowledging the drive of the young challenger of this great game called life. The Argent's house. It was currently night time, over 9:15, when Gerard and Chris came back from their separate outings but coincidentally pulled off the driveway at the same time. We need to talk. Chris said with a grave voice, one that perfectly mirrored the dark look on his face. Gerard didn't say anything and just walked inside the house, silently acknowledging whatever it was that Chris was adamant on talking about. Dinner was awkward and silent and a tacit agreement was reached as everybody did nothing to break it and just rushed their dinner and went straight to bed, leaving the two men sitting opposite each other to carry on with whatever they wanted to talk about. Why are you still keeping the betas alive and torturing them? They should have been killed off by now, including Derek, most especially Derek. We've had our revenge for Kate, despite her wrongdoings, no need to drag this any further than it has the right to be. Chris asked. While he was more than ready to get his dirty as many times that it took, he had absolutely no passion lost for pointless torture when the goal has already been achieved. And you think I don't know that? What I do with Derek and his pack of domesticated dogs should no longer be of any importance to you. I have my own plans for Derek until then, his life and death, including those of his betas, are mine to decide. Gerard's slow-spoken reply and the cold steel gaze of his eyes as he stared at Chris, who matched it with his and more, already told Chris that his interference on this matter wouldn't be condoned. Chris sneered as he looked at Gerard and asked his main question. And Allison? Is your dear granddaughter also a part of your plan? I fail to see the issue with your question. Is she not supposed to lead the family in the coming future? What problems do you have with the future leader of the Argent hunting family learning from the most experienced member of the family? Though he completely dodged Chris' questions, he raised up a vital one as if asking if his own son had a problem with him teaching his only granddaughter. You will push her too far to the point she'd be left as nothing but a living carcass of who once was. Chris' voice went up a few octaves as he banged on the table between them, anger apparent in his eyes. In response to his son's blatant accusation, Gerard's voice too raised as his anger spiked. How dare you? You dare say I'd willingly destroy a child of my own blood? In response to Gerard's outburst, Chris laughed darkly with pain and sadness evident in his eyes. As if you didn't do that to Kate already. Whatever you taught her warped her so much that she didn't even think twice about burning down a house full of children. Innocent children. Gerard spat out in disgust. Bah! What innocence? They are children of werewolves, sooner or later they will follow in the predecessor's claw prints and take the lives of innocents. They were children. Chris finally couldn't anymore and shouted at the top of his voice that whole house definitely heard. He took a deep breath and continued in a much lower tone. There is a reason for the code and why we follow it. We hunt those who hunt us, we always have, for centuries. And yet it means nothing to you. Be careful of your next words, Christopher. Gerard gravely warned, but Chris couldn't care less about any of his warnings, not when this concerns his precious daughter. Whatever sick plans you have for Derek and his pack, keep Allison out of it. I'll be supervising her training and capabilities from now on. I'll be the one to decide when she's ready to take up the mantle. With his final piece said, Chris walked out on Gerard and went straight to retire to bed in the worst of moods. Chapter 100, Chapter 97. Ms. Marin Moral POV. I sighed after Tristan left my office and reached to the drawer of my desk and pulled out a few files from it. It's a regret that Jackson died. He could have been a great help for the coming tide. I sighed as I signed off Jackson's files and then looked at Lydia's files. It's surprising that she was a Banshee all this while, something that totally escaped me when I was looking into them. But looking at it now, I can see why Banshee is present in Beacon Hills at this time. Nature always seeks to balance everything around it, and the presence of a Banshee and a vampire in the same place at the same time only speaks of one thing for the coming future. Well, it's already here if I think about it, the Alpha, the return of the Argents, the Kanima, a vampire, a Banshee, it all points to one thing in the end, death. A lot of it. I would have laughed at the cruelty of the world if I wasn't one of its balance keepers. I, more than anyone else, know how far nature can go to make sure that everything rests on a scale. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. I wonder if he is going to speak to her? As two supernatural species most in tune with death, there might be something surprising if they remain in the vicinity of each other. I mused to myself as I signed on the paperwork neatly arranged in front of me. Maybe I should push Scott McCall in his way for added surety? Sigh. I really want to, because what is coming will need all of them if they want the slightest chance of survival, but I doubt he'd want that. Well, I can push Scott and Lydia Derek's way if Tristan wants nothing to do with them. He already has his hands full dealing with the Argents as is, or so I think. Time will tell, I guess. I shook my head as I said that because it's funny when you realize that they don't have that much time. Tristan Hayes POV. After Tristan left Boyd in the basketball court, not noticing the presence of Scott and Styles, he made a beeline for Malia and found her in the midst of some girls who hushed down as soon as they saw him approaching. Your boyfriend is here, Malia. One of them teased, but whatever reaction she might have been expecting was not Malia's to give, as the tease went straight past Malia's head as the blunt girl only saw it as pointing out the obvious. Yeah, I can see that. Catch you later. Yeah. Bye Malia, bye Tristan. The group of girls waved at Malia and coyly at Tristan as they left, but the dark-haired boy currently didn't have any of his focus on them. Friends? Tristan asked, surprised. Malia shrugged nonchalantly and replied. Friendly, I guess, she said, and led the both of them inside the classroom where Tristan took the seat in front of her. So what's got you in a hurry, and why did you go to the guidance counselor's office again? She asked. Well, it's about Lydia for both. About Ms. Morrill, well, we can rule her as a supernatural of sorts. What it is I got no idea. All I know is that she's invested in Lydia and somehow is a bit adamant and wants me near Lydia for some reason. Malia frowned as she heard Tristan recount the discussion he had with Ms. Martin Morrill this morning. I got it. She smacked her fist as she came up with a good idea that would solve any problem concerning the unknown guidance counselor. Let's kill her. Luckily Tristan's face was already in a deadpan by the time she said she had an idea, fully knowing what kind of ideas Malia could come up with concerning any living problem they faced. What? It's a suggestion. She huffed and looked away as Tristan's deadpan felt condescending to her. Tristan sighed, well, it's not completely out of the table, but that's for a concrete cause. It was an obvious fact that they couldn't just go around with killing people just because they wanted to. Among Satomi's younger betas, Tristan and Malia had the highest kill count, and it was something Satomi wasn't proud of in the least. Sure, they were the most violent ones, but that was no excuse when it came to the Buddhist pack. That aside, it seems she knows something about Lydia that we don't. You said she might want the both of you close, did she say to visit her? Tristan nodded. But I honestly can't be bothered to do that. You said she's already making it back, right? Then we wait and see. Satomi also didn't say anything about how to nurse her back to health, so all we can do is sit back and let her do whatever it is that banshees do. I see. She nodded in understanding. Allison and I are visiting her today, more like she's forcing me to. Hopefully we can get more answers from our visit. They were still taking what they saw in Lydia's house lightly, even though they knew what it meant, probably because she was yet to draw anything about them or someone close to them. So what are you doing after school if you are not coming with us? I want to speak to Derek and find out why he and his pack just went under. There must be a reason why no one has gotten a whiff of him or Isaac and Erica for days now. He said. He kissed Malia on her cheek and left her to go about his day, well, to continue his day, as the bell was just minutes away from ringing the end of school hours. Pulling out his phone as he got inside his car, he called Derek's line a few times, but none of the calls went through. He also texted Derek for his location saying they needed to talk, but he got no replies even after driving for an hour without any destination. Okay, something seems fishy. Seeing as he got no response even after numerous tries, he drove back home thinking of what could have happened to Derek that he couldn't answer. It could be the hunters. He drove off and parked his car in the parking lot of a mall and left it there before continuing on foot to the forest, where he broke off into a sprint as soon as he was sure no one could see him. His body whizzed through the forest vegetation with nimble grace as he weaved through trees and every obstacle in his way and headed towards the old Hale house. He made sure to keep his senses peeled in case anyone was around the vicinity, and while he didn't catch anything on his way, he caught sight of two familiar figures as he made his way near them. He hid between the trees and silently watched as Scott and Styles looked all over the place looking for Derek. It's definitely the hunters, he concluded. If Scott, who Derek absolutely wanted in his pack, couldn't find him, then the only explanation was either he was hiding from the Argents or maybe he's been caught by Allison's dad? You can't deny that it's not a possibility. Hell, it's the only possibility since they literally have no one else to hide from, he heard Styles say in an irritated manner. Then what are we going to do? We should be on our way to Lydia's house pronto. You heard Allison say she was going there along with Malia. I don't *king know why we are still wasting time looking for Derek. Styles shouted and kicked the ground in a frustrated manner. Tristan watched as Scott approached his friend with apprehension and tried to reason with him. I don't think Malia is going to kill Lydia when Allison is there. Styles turned to look at Scott as if he just said the most stupid thing he's ever heard. They killed Jackson, Scott. Matt too. It was a little surprising, but I figured out Matt's involvement with the Kanima. What makes you think they won't kill Lydia? That's why we are looking for Derek, right? Those pictures she drew might mean something and Derek might know what it means. Styles rolled his eyes sarcastically at Scott and replied. Yeah, like it'll be that important if she's dead. Seeing that they didn't know much about Derek's whereabouts either, Tristan decided that there was no need to hang around these parts anymore and was about to leave when Scott stopped Styles from saying anything else and looked around warily. I think someone is watching us. His words alarmed Styles that the latter immediately hid behind him as Scott focused his hearing and smell to trace who was stalking them. Seeing Scott trying to find his location, Tristan slowed down his blood flow and heartbeat to a slow tempo. Did he find me? He thought but shook his head. His reaction was too late, so it couldn't be that he found me. His instincts probably told him he was being watched.
Thanks for listening.